This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. My guest this week is Heidi Matthews, a professor of law at Osgoode Hall Law School at York University in Toronto, Ontario. I asked Heidi to be on the show because her work raises questions about freedom and agency, for women in particular, but really for everyone, in ways that I've never seen before. In her work and in this interview, Heidi does the best thing a professor can do, which is to make me rethink some ideas I've held for a very long time. If you think you know what freedom is, you might think again. This is my interview with Heidi Matthews. So Heidi, I don't like professors, generally speaking. I don't get along with them. But you do. Or do you?
Maybe the question is, do you get along with me as an exception?
Well, you and I already have a checkered past, don't we? Which we can talk about if you want to. No, I really can't stand them. Very few exceptions. Actually, I can't even think about that. I can't even think of the exceptions right now. So maybe you'll be the first. We'll see how it goes here.
Geez. Okay.
But really, you are so different than any other professor I've known.
Oh, goodness. And I'm supposed to respond to that.
Yeah. And you can't look
the butter up.
And that's not in your notes.
I'm not looking at my notes. I'm trying to
see.
Oh,
well,
dear. It's all on the table, literally. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, you know what I mean, though, because we've talked about this. There's a personality type, don't you think, among professors? There
can be. I mean, I should say I love and respect my colleagues, most of them. Mm-hmm. My colleagues, of course, I do love and respect, as well as the friends and the close network. We talked about this, but the friends and the close network of scholars that I'm lucky enough to have around me and really in proximity that actually, I think, supports the kind of, heterogeneous, let's call it, work that I think I'm doing or trying to do. So it's actually my experience, as I said, I'm extremely lucky. And it's my experience, I'm worthy, but also very lucky.
So you told me repeatedly that you were lucky.
Yeah.
And I told you repeatedly that you're not lucky. You're actually very good at what you do, because even though I have a very low opinion, as everyone knows, of higher education generally, right, places like McGill don't give, what did you get? What is it called? Great distinction to their undergraduates, unless they're pretty damn smart, right? What did they give you?
Yeah. So I think it was great distinction, but I think there's another. I think you can even level up from that.
Oh, so you are kind of dumb, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I think
you're a little overrated, actually.
I didn't get a very good mark in business transactions.
Oh, that's why you're a socialist. Okay. It's all coming together.
It all
now
goes back to business transactions.
Okay, let's pull the lens out for a second here. So you are a professor of law, an assistant professor of law at Osgoode Hall, which is a part of, it's the law school of York University, which is in Toronto, Ontario. And it's considered to be one of the top law schools in Canada or North America. Where does it rank?
Yeah. So, again, I'm never one to sort of drop names in this kind of rankings and that sort of thing. It's one of the historic, law schools in all of Canada, and Upper Canada certainly, which is basically Ontario. And it's a very highly ranked school. I mean, people can Google it.
I'm only doing this clarification because, as you know, Americans don't pay any attention to what goes on in Canada. So
I see.
You could have a Nobel Prize winner, and if Michael Jackson were from Canada, we wouldn't have heard of him. because we just don't pay attention to you.
But so many of the great entertainers are from Canada.
I know, but we don't care.
Oh, okay.
No, you know what I mean. So we don't know. But Osgoode is considered. I mean, it's
yeah, no, it's a top law school in Canada.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's fair.
And you went to McGill, which is certainly one of the top undergraduate programs in Canada, right? Maybe the top.
Sure.
It's prestigious,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And you did very well there. And then you went to Harvard Law,
yes.
right? And you got multiple degrees, didn't you?
Yeah. So I went to law school at McGill. I did an undergraduate before that at a small liberal arts college on the east coast of Canada. A year of that I spent in France. And I did a master's in law at Harvard. That was followed by a doctorate at the law school there. So I was in Cambridge for about 7 years, I guess.
So you have...
So I've lived in the quote unquote US for some time.
You have a doctorate in legal studies. Is that how it's put?
I think they call it Doctor of Juridical Science.
Doctor of Juridical Science. Yeah. So you can
Pretty
do all
sexy
kinds of
name.
stuff with that. Now, the one thing you can't do, right, is practice law. Is that right?
Well, me personally,
Yeah.
I'm not. No, I never wrote a bar. But that's a conscious decision.
I mean, that degree will not get you
that degree alone. No, but
Yeah.
you wouldn't be able to be admitted to do that degree without having
passing
a
the bar. Sure.
No. I'm not a lawyer.
I know. I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just sort of funny, right? You're like a world expert on law, but you can't practice law, and you don't practice law, and you never have practiced law.
No,
you only think about law.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, my specialism is in large part international law.
Mm-hmm.
At law school and for a bit after law school. And then when I was doing my doctoral work, I did some, internshipy things, actual internships and clerkships. But yeah, no, I've made a decision to stay outside of the formal legal system in terms of engaging with it. As a practitioner, in part because that would entail being part of the formal disciplinary project that is the law, which I have a sort of meta critique of. And
I was going to say,
yeah. So it's sort of it's obviously a conscious.
This is in part because you think law, on one level,
Yeah.
I think this is fair to say, is bullshit.
Yeah, totally.
How so?
Yes.
How's it bullshit?
I think so the answer to that would typically depend on what one is claiming when one claims authority in the name of law, right? So, and in general, oftentimes they'll be making a truth claim, right?
I've heard of those. I've heard of those.
Yeah. Often they'll be making a truth claim, and they'll also be making just knowledge-based claims and using law both as a shorthand for authority, but also for explanatory reasons. And so my basic contention, or not even contention, but method really, is to say that law is simply a contingent technology of power in society in much the same way as all the other ones.
Oh man, I love that. Hold on. Contingent technology of power.
Yeah.
I love that. Can you unpack that a little bit? What's contingent?
You're wobbling your head.
No, I'm
What's
just,
contingent about it is that, well, I mean,
I'm swimming in the brilliance of that. No, really, I am. I love the way you put that. So what's contingent about it?
You are taking the piss.
No, I'm not. I do this to all my guests, but I mean it every time.
Yeah. Okay. So contingency simply means it could have been otherwise, which means that, laws don't reflect anything primordial or universal about human behavior, even though depending on your approach to the study of law in society, you might think that they do. So moral blameworthiness is one way of thinking through.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Another killer phrase. Can you unpack that one
moral
too?
blameworthiness.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you're looking at, law, as we know, the law is much broader than the criminal law, but people often tend to siphon their thoughts directly into criminal areas, right? When we talk about the law, and that's fine. So it's a great example to talk about because the criminal law, when we as social actors, right? So as one of my graduate professors used to say, people with projects in the world, if lawyers or politicians or academics or whoever on the street, or the government for that matter, when we're justifying our actions in terms of the criminal law. So for example, we're saying, murder should be punished. One way to do that is to say that murder should be punished because it's wrong as a matter of moral fact or certainty. It's not the only way of justifying that, but that's sort of one example. And so a lot of the law proceeds on that basis. Mm-hmm. But these are contestable claims is the whole point. Right. So they're it's just shorthand for a whole bunch of commitments to the way that we should live life.
So I'm trying to think about how I would put this, and I need your help here. So what does law do? Does it reify morality?
It can do.
Is that what we're talking about here?
So it does many things.
It's part of it, right? But you're talking about more than that. It's a reification. It's also, God, what is the word? It makes something permanent in a way, right? It makes something.
Yes. So that's so exactly. So another
yeah.
Right. So another thing that's really important for the law is the and for justifications of legal systems in general is that they provide stability within society, predictability, and consistency. Right. So the whole reason that we expect, so you've heard of the system of precedent, obviously, right? So stare decisis, there's the idea that we should decide like cases alike, because that involves, that's how you treat people fairly in society. And part of fair treatment involves consistency and stability, right? So every time you bring a sort of legal claim to a court, as long as that case is sufficiently like the case that came before it, then that case should be decided along the same principles that determine the first case.
So
that's the idea, anyway.
Right. So you disrespect our Constitution for two reasons. One is that you're an alien.
It's not my Constitution.
That's what I just said. One reason is that you're an alien,
yes.
And the second reason is this, and this is the real reason, of course, right? You think, and I agree with you completely, that this reverence, it's more than reverence, right, of the Constitution. It's this. Still, it's going on, right? Continued attempt to organize or reorganize society, social relations generally, around a document that was written 250 years ago by a handful of particular men who had particular purposes. And yet we treat that as if it was what? The word of God, right?
Absolutely.
Everyone, please think about this for a second. That's how we treat the Constitution, isn't it? Why on earth should we even read the damn thing? Much less organize our current society around it.
Right.
I mean, of course we should read it, but I mean, organize.
You should read it because it happens to govern you. But yes, for that reason.
Exactly.
But for no other reason.
Only out of self-defense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But am I right that that's kind of where you're coming from?
Yeah. And I think that's it. So the American Constitution is a great example of that. And I think, and I think the sort of the violence, like the epistemic violence that my students encounter when I confront them with the idea that law is not, on the first day of law school, I happened to teach our introductory class for law students. That's the first thing they get before they have their general classes. And they learn about, it's called ethical lawyering in a global order or something like that. Ethical lawyering in a global community. I should know the name.
I hate it already. Okay.
Right. And it's a weird combination of like professional rules and standards with what it means to live in an increasingly globalized world. So it's a fascinating course. And I think I try anyway to do really interesting stuff with that. And one of the first things that I do is to start from that, this sort of meta or structural position, right? I think I'm a structuralist.
Well, okay. So your students are law students.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. You teach. Yes. You're a law professor.
They're JD students.
Yeah. They're JD students. They want to be lawyers.
They do. They do. That's why they experience this as violent.
You walk in. They walk into your classroom, and there you are telling them that the whole thing is bullshit. Contingent, social construct, designed for probably not such great purposes, according to you. And
depends,
the whole thing is bullshit.
So
they experience epistemic violence. You are hurting them with your words.
No.
Yeah, you are, because you're telling them everything they want to do is bullshit.
So two things. I don't know if you're taking the piss or not. The violence is just forcing them to confront themselves. Rather than, I think there is, you could have such a thing as abusive speech, right? I don't think that's the claim I'm making. And secondly, the bullshit claim is only partly true. So it's bullshit with respect to certain contentions. It's bullshit the law is bullshit with respect to the claim that it reflects moral truth, or even epistemic truth. But it's not bullshit as a lever of power in society.
Right, of course.
So obviously it's hugely important.
Right.
But the way to manipulate that level lever rather of power, you can only do that effectively if you disabuse people of the notion that it's the word of God or whatever.
Yeah. So the guillotine is real, and it really,
absolutely, yes, very much.
And it really cuts off people's heads.
Yeah, it does, and
super
it's sanctioned by law. Yeah,
super real.
Yeah,
but is it an instrument of justice? Right. That's what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
The law is a guillotine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be. Yes.
Yeah. And right, but is
it also? I mean,
But is there any necessary correspondence between the law and truth? And that's what you're challenging.
Absolutely.
There we go. Right. And it's in particular moral truth. You're saying, am I right that there's a rupture for you between law and morality or moral truth? Or
yes, absolutely. So this is a long-standing debate in legal philosophy, right? Like, is there a relationship between law and morality, and what is it? And I don't think there's.
And you're on the crazy side.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, all of that happens. That debate is ongoing. It has been for some time, and it's alive and well in the hallways of legal philosophy departments. I don't think it's a very interesting debate.
Oh, really?
Well, because I think we have the answer, right?
I do. Oh.
Do you know what I mean? So once you have the answer, so what's interesting to me is to say, look, so I come down on the side of no, there's no necessary relationship between law and morality, but what I want to study is the way in which we discursively make claims in society that invoke both law and morality, and that's how we organize power. Yeah. So it's a sort of Foucauldian move in that sense.
Totally.
Right? Yeah.
Foucauldian move, Michel Foucault. That's what she just referenced. Yeah. So I make sure in every episode that either I or the guest
I thought I would drop that in.
Name drops Foucault. I got to stop doing that. No, I'm going to this is going to be a kind of a late New Year's resolution. I'm no longer going to mention two names, Michel Foucault or Sam Harris. That's it. I'm done. Never again. Those two, all gone. Okay. So are you a Foucauldian? Do you believe this stuff about postmodernism and there being no real truth and no objective reality and all that?
Yeah, I don't. So I don't need to. I'm not wedded to the philosophical framework in the way that some thinkers are. So I don't need to. I'm certainly not a huge expert on Foucault. I've spent much more time with other philosophers of law. But I do consider myself, in the loose way. I mean, we can throw around language of postmodernism, but yeah, absolutely. I don't have a problem saying that I have a postmodern approach to the study of law. That's true. It's obviously true.
I mean, I thought you did. I wasn't totally sure.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, cool. I'm happy there.
But you're also a socialist.
Yeah.
We'll just table that for a second. We'll get to that later. I'd like to know, you can be a socialist, totally, and be a postmodernist.
Thank you.
You're allowed. Yeah. You've been granted that by the king here. Okay. So
guillotine's up back.
None of this is why I know about you. And none of this is why I invited you to be on this show. But now these are just additional reasons because I love everything you're saying so far. No, you have made something of a name for yourself recently by criticizing the MeToo movement with one article in particular, right? And then several public conversations you've had on podcasts and other shows in various countries too, right? You've been on shows in like Australia and the States and Canada and UK also, maybe? Or
I haven't done a podcast in the UK, but I've given academic talks in the UK.
On this though?
Yes.
On Me Too?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, right, that's how I know about you. And I loved what you wrote about it, and I've loved what you have said about it. And why don't we do that right now? So, you don't believe in truth. And that might tell people right away what your position is on this, because a lot of women have been saying that their truth, right, my truth needs to be treated by everyone as the truth. Is that one way to summarize the Me Too movement?
The believe all women thing?
Yeah. Isn't that on one level what's going on there?
I mean, they're asking us to, so hashtag believe women asks us to purposely suspend curiosity or disbelief about the content of the claims being made. And that's so interestingly, that's a very anti-legalist way of approaching truth, because even the law will say we want to examine both sides of a question, for example, right? So there are interesting ways which I think this so-called movement both intersects with and butts up against legalist ways of thinking.
Right.
And that's one way in which it's actually really an anti-legal sort of claim.
Are you talking about the adversarial model?
Yeah. So right. So
they're kind of just bypassing that, right? Or they're saying that's
no. I think they do a lot of things with it. I think there's a lot going on there. But the Believe Women claim, so I'm not sure that they would understand this in this way, but they want to say that we need to not investigate both sides. On the other hand, many in I hate we'll just call it a movement for lack of a better word. I don't think it is. I mean, it's
why
something.
Is it not a movement?
I don't know. I mean, I don't like the idea. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's a social movement, but I also am not wedded to that. So, but I just whatever. So movement. Well, let's call it that.
Okay.
So many people within the movement then will also simultaneously make a correlative claim, which is to say that what it means to believe women in this context is actually to ask the legal system to deal with their stories differently, right? So part of what they're doing is actually contesting the way that the legal system is set up, right? So they're saying, look, we need to change the law to make it like easier. For example, that's one of the claims made. We need to change the law to make it easier to believe women, right? Which would mean a whole host of things potentially. But one of those things would be like, changing our evidentiary rules, for example. And there are a whole host of costs and benefits that go along with that. So they're making traditionally anti-legalist claims, but sometimes within a legal framework. And so in other words, there are many internal contradictions. I mean, of course, in all movements, but in particular in this one that I'm very concerned about. And that's sort of one of them.
Oh, yeah. So the costs and benefits of being treated like that by the legal system. So the benefits are pretty obvious. If everyone agrees with me, no matter what I say about what happened to me, then I can understand, I can get anyone put in jail. I can get anyone fired. Right. So those are the obvious benefits of that.
Well, benefits for those making the claim.
But right.
Yeah.
But if it were just benefits, I suppose you wouldn't be so upset about this movement. And so
nothing ever happens that way, right? Like it's a seesaw.
But what are the costs?
What would be
in other words, if the women who are calling for that, and by the way, it's not all women, it's not even all MeToo women, but some women certainly are. Sure. Some feminists certainly are, right? Absolutely. And what would be the costs for them or for anyone?
So I think there are costs to both men and women in that system. And when I say in this proposed reform, in other words, right? So, and when I say that, so what I'm going to say might appear slightly crude, and I understand that, and it might assume, some kind of inherently divergent views on the part of men and women. So I wouldn't, just prefacing that by acknowledging that could come out in what I'm about to say, but basically, men and women have assuming mainstream ideas about what men stand to gain from a system of dealing with sexual abuse or harassment or misconduct that makes it hard to prosecute in the regular sense, in the sense that you have to prove a claim beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And the Believe Women is rejecting that contention. So assuming that, and assuming that what women stand to gain is that actual cases of abuse would be dealt with by the legal system more often and would be dealt with better, right? Even if we were to assume those things are true, even if we were to assume that it would actually help women in some way, that actual cases of real abuse would be better dealt with and more frequently dealt with, there are also a series of costs that come throughout daily life with these sorts of policy reforms. And I think so for me, a large part of this is sort of making clear the depth with which this supposed movement is actually challenging the way that we organize power in society right now. And so one concrete way of thinking about that is that people won't be able to act or will refrain from acting in ways that they might ordinarily want to, because we've shifted the calculus of incentives for social action, right? So men might refrain from approaching women in ways that they would have without this shift in policy. And women are also going to change their sexual behavior, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Did you want me to be like, yeah. So, I mean, there are many ways of fleshing that out more concretely, which I'm sure we'll get to. But the idea is that, stricter, quote unquote, stricter enforcement can only happen if we're letting something else go.
So,
and so that something else is a sort of careful attention to detail when we're adjudicating these claims.
Mm-hmm. So men are less likely to approach women. Men are less likely to initiate sexual contact or romantic contact with women, right?
Yeah, I think that's
okay.
I think that's reasonable. Sure.
Yeah. Women, therefore, I guess, at least theoretically, would then be deprived of potential contact with men that they might actually want.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But then there's something even bigger and worse going on, isn't there? In terms of costs, which is that women are, under this new regime that's being proposed, are treated as a different entity with different interests, different needs. And that's it. There's a creation, there's a construct, right, of women going on in this, right? There's a new construct. Or maybe it's not new.
I'm not sure it's new. Yeah,
it's that
would be I would push back on that.
I agree with you. It's not new. It's about 150 years old.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Meaning it's Victorian.
Yeah.
It's neo-Victorian.
Right.
Yeah. And so what is that? And that to me, that's the bigger cost, is that women end up being treated actually as inferiors.
Yeah.
Don't they?
Yeah. I mean, but I think a lot of radical feminist activity long before MeToo goes in exactly the same direction. So I'm not sure that that's particularly new.
I agree with that too.
I think obviously the threat is greater now because MeToo has become such the discussion around it has become more mainstream. So actually the danger is probably greater, but I don't think that particular structure is any different.
Yep. So in the early 19th century, the argument about prostitutes was that women are uniquely vulnerable to exploitation, coercion, mental illness, and therefore need to be protected by the state, by institutions greater than themselves, by institutions greater than their communities and families, by the state. That was the argument.
Not just the state.
And their husbands and their fathers.
Yeah. I mean, I think the state is one. So I'm just thinking of, I was rereading parts of the history of sexuality on the plane. And I think.
Oh, really? Doing your homework, huh?
Well, I think.
But Foucault's not good on this. I mean, he's not specific about it.
Look, I mean, not because I need to revert to that, but I just think the state is like one way in which that happens. But there are other ways.
Oh, I'm just saying that was the argument made by people in the state.
Sure.
Right. People who were of the state and in the state.
And also religious.
Sure. Well, I was just going to say, and then a little bit later, like in the late 19th century, with the rise of industrial capitalism and factory work in particular, right? Have you heard of this? Protective legislation, it was called. So special laws to protect, quote unquote, women workers from the damaging effects of industrial labor, which meant that their hours by law were limited, their work hours. They could only work a certain number of hours per day and per week and per month and per year, right? Which basically made them, guess what? Poorer than men, because men, of course, were allowed to work as much as they wanted to. But that was in almost, I think, every state had a protective legislation regime, which kept women from working particular kinds of jobs also by law and kept them from working a certain number of hours. And that's a long argument among feminists. But generally speaking, I think that way of thinking about the law and women is consistent with what we're talking about here with the Me Too movement, calling for special dispensation, I guess, for women under the law, right?
Yes.
And
I think that's broadly speaking right. Yeah.
And the treatment or assumption about women being uniquely vulnerable.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, fine. Yeah. So I think the vulnerability aspect is huge here, right?
Yeah. So what are the costs of that? Because you'll just be treated like a princess.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. This has been part of the standard critique. So
don't you want to be treated like a princess?
I'm not sure what that would mean.
Well, it means that every man would be obligated to protect you at all times and never harm you and protect you from any evildoer. The few men who are out there who are not signed on to treating you like a princess, we will vanquish them. That's what we will do. And we'll make sure that you live a comfortable, happy life, free of responsibility and free of danger. Why wouldn't you want that?
I mean, I'm a little bit, so yeah, sure. I mean, the state also can play that role in our lives, can't it? But,
right.
so I think what you're saying is actually it's sort of the state farms that role out to men in a way, right?
Well, the state wants it primarily, but it also
but it makes it happen
it.
through the institution of marriage and through the institutions of like how we organize money and marriage and children and all that, right? So they create the family structure in order to roll that out.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't. So I think you're absolutely right. Like a big part of, like, to the extent that there is a critique of MeToo or a backlash, and I do not situate myself in that camp. I don't think, and I actually, what I'm concerned with more is our broader questions than even MeToo. It's just that MeToo has been a really important moment in terms of talking about specific dangers. But yeah, so agency, of course. So people will say, well, we're just taking away women's agency. I mean, I think that's true. I mean, obviously that's true, right? So that's where you're going with this. So fine. Yeah. That's definitely true, but I think that's also only the beginning of the critique. And so it gets us part of the way, and it's probably a sufficient critique, but it's not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient is my point. So the point is, yes, it's obvious that we're removing agency when we do this. But the question is, what do we do with that, right? So from a policy perspective, you can take that in a multitude of different directions, and we still need an answer for which direction to take it in, and a theory about how to figure that out.
Why do we need a direction?
Well, we only needed.
Why can't we just remove? Right.
So the idea is that if you just
the special treatment of women,
because I think so. Then the idea is that if we just take away constraint, then people are left to their own freedom. Mm-hmm. Right. I think that's nonsense.
Oh, okay. All right.
So there's still, you know what I mean? Like so the idea that you can just institute individual freedom by removing of all that our only job, government's job is to remove all shackles and then step away. I don't think that's where I'm a socialist in part, right? So I don't buy that. I think,
all right. Yeah. So we have a conflict here. This is good. Let's do this. So instituting freedom is not something anyone I know would say. That's sort of a
well, no, it's like anti-instituting freedom.
Yeah,
our job is to take away the institution.
No one I've ever heard of would ever say that freedom can be instituted, right? You can't do that. But
no,
I think I get what you're saying here, which is that, well, maybe I don't get what you're saying. What's the problem with just removing the law?
Like in society?
Yeah. Because that's what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about, I mean, we're reducing law. I mean, the MeToo movement is asking for more law, right?
Well, no. So I'm not sure that that's particularly, again, not to, I do want to be careful of overgeneralizing and simplifying. So again, it's not there, not everybody in the MeToo movement is this punitive
for sure.
centric, but though there is a huge carceral
feminism.
Yeah, of course.
Elizabeth Bernstein at Barnard College coined this amazing term. She is amazing, and that's the term that she coined, carceral feminism, to describe. Yeah. And she did this many years ago, by the way. Before any of us were talking about this.
Absolutely, yeah.
Brilliant articles on this stuff.
And she had a great piece in the War on Sex book
about the tendency of current feminists, many current feminists, to wish for punitive, statist responses to any sort of perceived slights or perceived aggressions by men, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also an international version of that, right? So this
is there? I don't know.
Yeah. So Karen Engel and some others have been working on this.
Okay, so people don't know this. This is actually your specialization is international law, and with a particular focus on violence and sexual violence, right?
Yeah.
So you're an expert on this. I don't know this. So, yeah. So tell us, who is this person and what do they argue?
Oh, so Karen Engel's at the University of Texas in Austin. But she's been spearheading work on what she calls, her and others with her, call the anti-impunitive impulse or drive, basically. Anti-impunity impulse. And this is a thing. So a lot of my work is on international criminal law in general, but also with respect to sexual or gender-based crimes, which usually means in wartime or within a system of crimes against humanity, right? So usually some kind of armed conflict. So widespread mass atrocity, right, which can have a gender component. And it's just the basic idea is that feminists and in large part Western feminists, and among those in large part American feminists, have been pushing to reform international criminal law, basically to just create more and more and more offenses that are actually dealing with sexual crimes
I don't know about this.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about this.
Yeah. So like the way in which, so you know about the International Criminal Court as an institution, it's sitting in The Hague. It came into being as an institution in 2002, but the drafting process for that institution and the laws that it would be, making happen in the world, it's been going on since the early 90s to early to mid 90s. And core people that you do know, like Catherine MacKinnon, were very vocal in this movement.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know this.
Catherine MacKinnon was actually the special gender advisor at the ICC for a very long time. Yeah.
Oh my God. Who appoints those people?
Oh, okay. So I think it would have been so don't quote me on this. I'm assuming it was the prosecutor, who at the time was Luis Moreno Ocampo, was a hugely problematic figure with his own MeToo story that prefigured all of this. But there's a whole international component to this, so there are linkages between the work that feminists are doing domestically and the way that they try to play that out on the international stage, right? So very concretely as a matter of foreign policy, and I know that we're going to talk about that in a few days, but yeah.
Did this start with the Balkans? The Balkan War?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Because mass rape was what was said to be the preferred weapon of the Serbian soldiers, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Okay, so then when they prosecuted those guys in The Hague, in the ICC, the International Court.
So it was a separate court than the ICC, but the same idea. It was a court that prefigured the ICC.
Prefigured it.
But same thing.
This is the beginning of it, though,
yes,
right? Yeah,
absolutely.
okay. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. And then the prosecutor gets to, appoint advisors or something? Yeah,
so before, and
they picked
so they will have gender.
MacKinnon?
So Catherine MacKinnon.
Oh.
Yeah, of course. No, I know. I
this.
hear him drawing on. So I'm trying to, I know this is an interview, but drop some footnotes to my sources as well.
No, please do. Yeah.
So a big pioneer, fellow traveler and mentor of mine in graduate school is Janet Halley at Harvard Law School. And she did a lot of a huge genealogical project mapping exactly how these feminists.
Janet Halley is awesome.
She is fantastic.
You didn't mention her to me before.
I haven't mentioned everything
when
yet.
we talked. Yeah, I didn't know. So she was one of your advisors?
She wasn't formally one of my advisors. She was so she was in my broad circle at Harvard.
More important than an advisor.
She was hugely important, hugely supportive, and her work is seminal.
She's awesome.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay, no wonder.
And she, as you know, you will know her from her Title IX stuff. Yeah. I assume. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so all of this is part of what I'm trying to do with Me Too is to say, look, we need to take a step back and realize that the Me Too intervention is just one part of a much broader combination.
It's an international movement.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yes.
I didn't know this.
Yeah.
And you and I have been talking. We've talked for many, many hours this week before we turned the mics on, and this never came. I'm not blaming. I'm just saying I didn't know I did not know that. Yeah. It's amazing. It's an international phenomenon.
Did you think it was just American?
Yes, totally. And French.
That's why I'm here to.
And French because of Catherine Deneuve. And
well, she's anti-Me Too, but yeah.
I know. I'm saying, but because she made a stink out of it. But I didn't know. I thought it was basically a North American phenomenon.
No.
Holy crap! Although it kind of is because the United States runs everything. At the end of the day, right? I mean, no, seriously, right? I mean, you can't. Now. International. Am I right? International law is only somewhat autonomous from the dictates and the interests of the United States.
It's a longer conversation about the nature of what international law is and how it functions. And so because I'm not committed to legal systems as such, I'm not carrying a flame for international law.
I know you're not. No, I know you're a critic. I know, but I'm saying The Hague can only do so much against the interests of the United States, right? I mean, they're not an autonomous body.
Well, nobody's
truly,
but it's not just the U.S., right? So it's actually much more complicated.
We have all the guns and tanks, so they can't really do their own thing.
I don't know. I mean, China is pretty influential.
We have 10 times more guns and tanks than China.
Okay, they've got your money though.
Literally, maybe 20 times. Yeah.
But no, I mean, that's not untrue.
Okay. Yes, I'm just saying, but it is in a way, it is sort of a North American phenomenon being exported outward. Catherine MacKinnon.
So
she's North American, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, sure.
Hold on just a second. Some people may not know this name, Catherine MacKinnon.
Yes, go ahead.
I want to hear actually your summary of her because it's difficult. It's dangerous to even summarize her.
So I won't try to summarize her, but I'll give some context or background. So
how do you interpret her and her work and her arguments?
So I think the short story of MacKinnon is that to the extent that one can do this. I mean, I should say, look, I think there was a time and a place in a way for her work. So when she started out
in the 70s.
Yeah, so she's a
I mean,
a professor of law.
Oh, right.
She's at Michigan.
She's
but
one of you. Right. Yeah,
and she also spends half a year at Harvard, usually every year.
Right.
It's kind of, yeah. And so
she has the same degree that you do.
No, actually, I don't think she does. I mean, it's a recent thing that people have. So first, that's a history of legal education in the world. But in general, Americans don't do doctorates in law. They're sort of starting to now, but it's a bit of a difference between the sort of.
But she doesn't come out of
Anglo system.
Does she come out? I don't know. Does she come out of the humanities or social sciences? What?
So I'm actually not. I have to check what her undergraduate.
She's a law professor,
but she's a law professor right now,
and Michigan.
Yeah. And she pioneered, her and others, but she was sort of the biggest flag bearer of what's known as radical feminism. And which, I mean, it sounds like a great idea.
It sounds cool.
Because it's radical. And
it's feminist.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, you know. And
radical equality.
So when she started out,
Who wouldn't want that?
She was more actually radical than she is now in the sense that she was like a Marxist, basically. And but what happened was a huge part of her work is premised on a certain ideas about patriarchy and the role of sex in that structure. And the basic idea is that society is structured around the male domination of women, and that domination is sexualized, and that the most sort of the paradigmatic expression of that domination is through various forms of sexualized stuff, and whether it's reproductive control, rape law, lack of sufficient rape laws, or the way that men rape women or whatever. But basically, sexual violence is core to her argument, and it's something that she sees men doing to women. So sex is something that men do to women.
Right.
That's a huge part of this.
Famous line from her is subject, verb, object. Man fucks woman.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
you just summarized it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
so what that means though is that there was a time and a place for that. So I think you have to look at these things historically, and the shifts in thought that would have been required in the 70s and 80s and maybe even through the 90s to get to the point of one would hope self-reflexivity about feminism and the feminist movement that we should have today, and that I want us to have, because I don't reject like the idea of feminism. Maybe was required. And in terms of stuff just to clue her up, in terms of things she achieved, she was big. So she was huge in reforming sexual harassment law, actually creating federal sexual harassment law.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
How so though? How did she reform it?
Well, as far as I know, she was actually sort of created it. So just by like lobbying the government.
So what do we have now that we didn't have before in terms of federal sexual harassment law? Mm-hmm. What do we have? I don't even know. What's the federal law on sexual harassment?
Well, I mean, part of that is Title IX, as far as I know, like in terms of like, so that covers sexual harassment in the workplace.
Yep. Okay, right? Title IX. So she was behind Title. Was she part of the?
So
Title
I don't know.
IX?
So again, don't quote me on this. I'd have to go check the exact details of that. I just know that she was extraordinarily important in the sexual harassment stuff. Mm-hmm. That became in the 90s. It morphed into the work that she did around international laws of wartime rape. But the basic takeaway is that her work, which she thought of, I think. And probably still does, is like quite leftist, has now taken on what I think is a very conservative texture. Let's
do the Catherine MacKinnon story again. Let's do it. Let's do another narrative. Okay, so not that anything you said was wrong, but let's fill it out some more. So she became famous. I think this is fair to say, and everyone would agree with it. In the late 70s and early 80s with the anti-pornography movement. She and Andrea Dworkin.
Oh, yeah, I left out the pornography. So the pornography ordinances were mostly in the 80s, I think, the work they did on that. Yeah, so that's a corollary. So they were very, very anti-porn. That's a huge part of their policy work.
And that's how they became famous. They were not known before then.
That's
MacKinnon,
probably true.
For sure, yeah. I mean, that I know. Then the question...
So they were trying to get municipalities, basically.
And they succeeded, I think, once or twice in Minneapolis, I think, passed an ordinance banning porn in certain parts of the city. Yeah. And very importantly, and you were kind of alluding to this, they joined with Christian conservatives in that.
Of course.
So Dworkin and MacKinnon, Andrew Dworkin and Catherine MacKinnon, in the late 70s and early 80s and into the 90s even, were literally working directly with Christian fundamentalist conservatives to ban and censor pornography specifically, and they were somewhat successful, but that was their movement. That's how they became famous.
And that's coming, and that's so we've seen now one of the bad, I'm arguing things about MeToo is the move this is cropping up again. The lobbying against
so
pornography.
You're just blowing my mind that she's part of this international thing. That it's an international thing and that she's behind it.
And she also, so the porn
me
away. So porn was huge for her internationally as well. So part of the argument.
Oh my God.
Yeah, part of the argument about the reason why we had the level of sexual violence we allegedly did, not to say it didn't happen, but the numbers are contested, obviously, with these things, notoriously hard to measure. But her argument for part of the reason why we had the violence in the former Yugoslavia, MacKinnon, was that it was caused by porn.
No way.
Yeah.
She made that argument?
Yeah.
What? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, well, porn runs through it all. It's like just an expression of sexualized domination. Yeah.
Wow. So
right.
So the Serbian militias would go rampaging through these villages and pulling girls out of the houses and raping them because they had just watched a porn DVD. Is that her argument?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if she was saying it was because they just watched it that morning, but it was certainly because it was a structural part of society and male expectations about women and sex.
Okay, so that's one thing so she's famous for her.
It all is part of the same thing.
This is blowing me away. Yeah. I did not know it was all connected. Okay, so the other thing, and this is why I wanted you to summarize her work instead of myself, because there's actually a debate, and I've had super smart sort of feminist opponents of her disagree with me on this interpretation, but I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure she basically has said flatly, publicly, that heterosexual sex is rape.
But I think Andrea Dworkin definitely said that.
Okay. Well, believe it or not, even some like pro-sex feminists don't agree with that interpretation, but I don't see how they can have that interpretation because it's there in the text.
No, I agree. So I've seen people have this discussion all the time, like frequently. About whether she thinks it, and then they'll say, "Yeah, but she got married and stuff," and she did actually.
I know. She used to live in my neighborhood in Park Slope.
Oh, really? Yeah. So in
a brownstone with her husband, by the way, who was a man. Yeah.
She did think that consent, think she's not dead yet. She does think that consent is not a really useful topic.
Dworkin is dead.
Yes,
MacKinnon is alive.
Is not. She's very
alive and well in Ann Arbor,
alive,
Michigan. Yeah. Okay.
I think she thinks that that the pervasiveness of sexualized male domination is such that women can never be truly free to consent to sex, and if that's the framework we're talking about as in terms of what's rape and not, is the fulcrum of that is consent. Then the logical conclusion is that all heterosexual sex is rape. So I think that's not. I think that's a reasonable interpretation.
You think it's a fair reading of her?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
My gosh. I think so too.
I do. Yeah.
Okay. So here's the thing.
And she's not the only one. I mean, there are many people with who hold views separate from hers, or that also think that, right? So there are different ways of playing that out.
Are there? I don't know.
Well, I mean, there are people, not different from hers, but there are people. So for example, and I cite this in my piece, but Robin West's just view that, so I don't think she.
Who's Robin West?
So she's professor of law and philosophy, Georgetown Law, and a feminist, of course.
And her argument is what?
So she talks about many things, but also, so for my purposes, so she objects to the language of consent as a useful way of thinking through. That was thinking through sexual relations, and she objects to it because it doesn't really go far enough for her, right? So she'll say that what we need to do is remove the pervasively coercive circumstances within which women live as a matter of daily life. And there are many different forms of coercion. And so for her, you could consent to sex and it would still be coercive.
Right. Like if I make all the money and
Yeah.
we're married, or just you're my girlfriend,
Right.
but I make all the money and you're living off of me and I want to have sex and you're not so keen on it, you're probably going to have sex with me even though you don't really want to.
Yeah.
And so what is that according to her? That's coerced sex.
Yes. And coerced sex is something that we should not want.
And to eliminate that, what does she propose?
Well, I mean, just eliminating the material conditions of coercion, right? So sort of like radical
material equality.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And probably cultural equality also. The treatment of women as equals in all ways.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. And you're not down with that.
Oh, I mean, the idea that goodness. Well,
I mean,
what I don't agree with is the following: is the idea that there's anything necessarily, specifically, or exceptionally wrong about the way in which, about sex and its relationship with coercion.
Aha.
That's what I'm trying to say. So
isn't that weird how we treat sex so differently?
Yes. So it's exactly.
Yeah.
So
really
my idea would be the following. Like if you look at Robert Hale, who's like a legal theorist in the early 20th century, and this goes back to our beginning of my point about how do we get actual freedom, and his notion, he was trying to, well over about 100 years ago now, push back on the notion that's possible because so much of life is organized around coercion,
right? And
that doesn't have to be the state coercing you.
Sure.
That's just social relations, right?
Sure.
So you can't be in the world within a legal system, but in general, without coercion in some broad sense operating from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep. And I don't think there's anything specifically coercive right now about sex. And even if there was, I don't think we should be, right? Even accepting that there was, we shouldn't be constructing a system of thought that encourages us to keep it that way.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you were actually critiquing the MacKinnonites for proposing or pretending that we can institute freedom.
Yes. Okay. Right. No, that makes sense. So part of my argument would be like, yes, the idea that you can get freedom, by, or equality, let's say, sexual equality by, fiddling around with sexual harassment law or rape law or whatever, emphasizes sex too much. And so it's this paradoxical thing, right? Where the more you talk about sex as the important thing, the more you make it the case because you encourage people to think that that's true. And then secondly, that's the structure that you've built in, then we're going to just constantly think that sex is an exceptional thing. And it might not be. And in many instances, it's not. And so in terms of my international work, what's really troubling for me is, so do you know Susan Brown-Miller's work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So
classic second wave feminist theorist.
Right. Mm-hmm. So her work is still hugely influential and in line with MacKinnon and others.
Famous in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, mostly 70s, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And her idea that, rape is a tool of war and a fate worse than death and whatever, took hold internationally. And we just assume that that's true now.
I did not know this.
And there's no reason to think that, no, exactly.
I didn't know the international component of it. That's amazing. I didn't know it went into international law. I think
what's interesting is that we always think that there's, this big border essentially between domestic and international law, but they're all the same people. And everyone's got a project and a will to power, and they want to have their power domestically. But you know what's even better? Having power at the UN.
Yeah.
Right? So that's been the project. And feminists have been hugely successful in this endeavor. And Janet Halley makes that argument. And I think she's right.
Oh, my God.
So the idea there would be it's very easy to see when I put it in those terms, because their contention is that rape, there's something really special about the harm of rape. And my suggestion is, well, the more we tell women that, and the more we prosecute crimes as rape, as opposed to calling them something like torture, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Why do we call a certain kind of harm in war rape as opposed to torture? What makes it better to call it rape as opposed to or something else?
Right.
It's just, just a language, a choice of language. The more we keep making it the case, and the more we reinforce stigma around sexual crimes and sexual violence,
the more important and scary and dangerous sex becomes, the more we do that. Right.
And so fascinatingly, the latest piece in that train wreck, let's say, is actually many feminist calls that have come in response to the attack in Toronto.
The guy in the van who drove over a bunch of women who and killed 9 or something?
He killed 10 people, 8 of them were women.
And he was inspired by Elliot Rogers, Roger, whatever, of Santa Barbara.
The allegation is that we don't really know all the details yet. Yeah. But he did post on his Facebook page that he was going to be part of the incel rebellion, and he lauded
the involuntary celibate.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Right. Movement, whatever it is. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Right. I really hope that's not a movement.
Guys who are unable to have sex or whatever, or women are not willing to have sex with them or whatever it is. Right. That's what it comes down to. Yeah. Okay. So how is
so women now, feminists now are saying we need to call that because so when it first happened, there have been a lot of van
terrorism.
Attacks. Yeah.
They want it to be called terrorism.
So now we want to have so Jessica Valenti, for example, this is very, predictable that she would do this, has called for this to be a quote misogynist terrorism.
I'm so glad you're here now for a lot of reasons, but this is one of them.
Just now.
This is one of them. No, this idea about terrorism, I've been thinking about this a lot, right? So
that's kind of taking this to its logical conclusion. So now we've got, not only do we have wartime rape is like the worst thing ever, but we have like misogyny as terror.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but let's talk about terrorism as a term and talk about it sort of in generic sense. Like what, to you, what's your take on terrorism? Like the discourse of terrorism, the way that it's used, what does it mean? How is it used, right? What do you do with that word?
What does one do with the word terrorism? What do you do? Me, well, I just try to understand it, but I think so terrorism, it's a long and checkered past, obviously. But my own view about terrorism is that it's a technology for taking certain political claims out of the realm of permissible discourse. Right. So basically, once you call, so you can think about this internationally. So in the context of the war on terror, right? The moment you call someone the discursive move, and Talal Assad at Columbia has done wonderful work on this. But drawing on some of his work I think that the basic move is to say once the U.S. is engaged in a just war, let's say, right? In other words, the U.S. is engaged in the quote war on terror, and it has a just cause for that. It has a political reason for using armed force that it's willing to back up substantively, right? And that would be, you could put that many different ways. One way would be to say, they're threatening our way of life. It's an existential threat, and therefore we have to counter that with armed force. That's just the argument structure. I'm just laying out the argument structure. Yeah. Now, in order to delegitimize the political commitments of their opponent,
that's it.
They call them terrorists.
That's it. Yeah.
That's the basic discursive move.
That's right.
Right. And I'm fully committed to that.
Yep.
So that was the way that the war on terror was played out over the last 20 years or 15 years. And
that's so important. I can't even.
It is.
Say that. Right. This has been dominating international politics for 20 years now, right? At least that the use of that term.
And actually, it predates 9/11, right? So because people knew that something like that was coming, right? Like we knew about Al Qaeda before 9/11 happened.
It's a way to I forget how you put it, but it's to dismiss or
absolutely,
or to not countenance,
not even to look at
the political claims of those we deem terrorists, right?
Absolutely,
of the enemy, the opponent, whatever they are.
Absolutely.
So that's why you can.
And can I describe Go ahead.
Sure. No, that's why you can just say. But no, that's why you can say. It doesn't matter that we've invaded their countries and bombed their children and sent drones to their weddings and all that stuff. It's simply that they are terrorists. And so their political claims are illegitimate.
Well, they're not political actors.
Because they're not political actors.
Exactly.
They are terrorists.
They're barbarians.
and therefore not psychotic, human. Right? That's the only debate, basically, is whether they're barbarians, primitive savages, or psychotic. Depending. Some people think maybe they're just both. But the thing is, and this is your point, and this is the crucial point, to call them terrorists is to take them out of the political world. So we cannot and should not have a political discussion about them. Because
that's why we can't negotiate with them.
That's it.
Yeah.
Sam Harris.
Okay. And that's been my thought since graduate school.
Sam Harris and most of the American political establishment.
Of course, yeah.
Right, yeah.
But they know that. Well, I don't know. But I don't know about Sam Harris. I don't really know anything about him. But I think
you think people in the State Department,
government, are
aware of this.
So maybe not consciously, but I think in like structure, I do. They know how because it's totally effective. It works. Yeah. And it also has this emotive component.
The difference is they believe it. We don't.
Absolutely. Right. And so what's happened is so that's been playing out. So I study the law of war, right? The law of armed conflict, how you can kill people and why, basically. And what's happened is, so this has been going on in the international realm for years. It's now...
What's the fancy Latin term?
For the law of war?
Just juice.
Oh,
what is
I guess it's different. Well, nobody knows how to pronounce Latin, but
yeah, how do you pronounce it?
So there's a use, I say a jus ad bellum and a jus in bello, and that simply means there's a law of war which governs when you can go to war, and there's a law in war which governs how you can do your war. Basically.
Or just war, right? It's what is just war?
Well, there's two parts to it.
Okay.
It's a dialectic. My dissertation is about this.
Please tell me that you destroy Michael Walzer in your dissertation.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank
of course
you.
I do.
I figured
it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Michael Walzer. Oh my God.
It's a nightmare. No.
Yeah, we'll get to him in a second, maybe. But anyway, okay. So continue.
Yeah. No, he's very relevant for all of it. Yeah. So because he totally buys into it. Sure. And it's also, this is linked to a very, I also contend it's a fully liberal set of commitments.
Exactly.
That allows us to get there.
Modern 20th century liberal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's what I mean by liberal.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
And I see them as my opponents in all sorts of areas of my work and including in this one. So yeah, and really, I mean, that's how liberalism works. Liberalism in the broad sense that we just described, it works by creating formal categories. Mm-hmm. In other words, hollowing politics out of its substance. So this is like where Carl Schmitt influences my work in large part, but in an important way, in other words.
Can you just do a Carl Schmitt thing for a second? Because I don't know Carl Schmitt's work. Right. Maybe a little bit and only by accident.
This is when people get to call me a Nazi now.
Oh, right. Because
he's the Nazi lawyer.
Right. So you're Nazi. Right. Well.
So, yeah. So
I mean, just listen to what you're saying. You're obviously a fascist.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So
Carl Schmitt argued what?
So Carl Schmitt's a great figure. Anybody who's I think he's just a genius, or was a genius. But on the wrong side of history and on the wrong side of politics. But, he was a legit Nazi. Yeah.
But didn't he get expelled from the party or something?
He did, but I don't need to say that he had good views about...
So he remained...
He's an authoritarian, and I don't think he was a fan of Jews in Europe and all sorts of things.
He remained Nazi-ish, even after he left the party.
Probably not a good guy,
No.
But the point is, and there was, and not to be facetious, but that's important because for a long time in all intellectual circles, you couldn't be so, and this plays into your skepticism about the academy and how it runs, you couldn't have a respectable conversation about Carl Schmitt until quite recently.
Oh, wow. Of course.
Because you'd be a Nazi.
You know why?
And go ahead.
Because he's a terrorist. You know what I mean? Right?
He's worse than a terrorist. So it's not, I
was going to say...
No, but this is really important. So can I tell you the distinction here?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
So the distinction between the Nazis and the terrorists is the following. It's actually better to be a Nazi. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Not to actually be one, but to be one in the discursive realm of international power. Right.
Yep.
So as a political actor, you're better off being, not nowadays, but being, although probably nowadays too, but back then, right? So we're talking about like the 30s and 40s. It would be, and even to the 50s, it'd be better to be a Nazi than a terrorist for the following reason. The way that the West, so the Allies, countered Nazism from a juridical perspective, and this comes out in my work on the Nuremberg trials, right? So in other words, the major criminal trials of the criminal trial of the major German war criminals, essentially. The short story there is that the legal theory used to make that, to organize and make that trial happen was to say the following. So we think, so if I were to ask you, maybe, I'm sure you're a historian, you know better, but if I were to ask anyone on the street what happened in the Nuremberg trial, because it's a huge cultural artifact, right? Like it's in our consciousness.
Whenever there's a movie made about something, Americans know about it. Yeah.
Okay, right. Yeah. So if you've seen Judgment in Nuremberg, for example, which was about another trial, but anyway, you would think, or you'd be led to believe that the Nuremberg trial was actually about prosecuting the Nazis for the Holocaust. This is completely false.
Keep going.
It's utterly wrong.
Well, I don't know.
The Holocaust figured tangentially.
Really?
And not really at all.
I do not know this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's only mentioned very briefly in the judgment.
This is why you're here. Because I'm learning just so much. This is great. Keep going. So what was it about?
We're not even talking about MeToo, but that's fine. Yeah, no, this is hugely important. And actually, there's a MeToo moment here as well. So remind me to tell you that. Okay? So what happened was, basically, we hadn't had an international criminal trial in the world before. There were sort of...
Right.
it's not that the idea hadn't existed.
This is basically the origin of modern international law, of what you do.
Well, no, so that's not true.
Well,
no, that's definitely not true. There's that's a longer story, but it's definitely the origin of international criminal law.
Okay. Yes.
So the idea that you could...
That's what I meant.
Right.
That's what
so
I meant.
international law is a much like we have,
like, I'm going to ask you about the origins of that too, which I actually do know about.
I will tell you it's not the Peace of Westphalia. But,
well, keep going. Yeah, I know.
But whatever.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it was the first time that an actual court was set up to actually try people for the political use, for political violence, right? So war is just political violence, right? It's the state implementing its monopoly on the use of force for political reasons. And that's fine. And we accept that. And that's what war is, right? We need to constantly remind ourselves that that's actually what we're doing. We're killing people to tell them that we know better.
Right.
Right? That's what war is.
We've decided what is best for them and for us.
Exactly.
What's better for them is to be dead. Or to have us...
Or colonized, or both.
Or to have us as their rulers.
Yes,
exactly. To be dead or to have us as their rulers. Okay.
Right, or some dead or whatever.
But we know that that's what they need. That decision has been made. And there is no further discussion on that question. That is what war is. Correct?
To my mind, that's what war is. No, well, okay, so now...
Boom. Yes,
although...
I agree. Yes, I love it.
And I agree, you're going to... Well, I think we will feel the same about this. So there are... The alternative narrative today is that it's war that is humanitarian intervention.
My favorite thing.
Right. So that's the Syria project today, but we'll bracket that.
Here's the thing about Samantha Power. She really does.
Oh, my Lord.
She really does know me. No, she does. She really does. She knows what I need. And she knows what I need. She's just here to help me out with the 82nd Airborne. You're like getting upset just at the mention of her name. How do you feel
every time I saw her give a talk or something? Or,
you've seen her in person? Oh, because of Harvard.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right. She was at Harvard.
No, we had the same graduate fellowship at one point.
Oh. Wait, what?
No, I was just a fellow. I had a fellowship at the
you were in the same
Center,
room with Samantha Power?
She wrote her book when she was a fellowship.
You were in the same room with Samantha Power many times?
No, not... I mean, I've seen her. She give talks. The first time I saw her, I was in... So this is anecdotally interesting. I was in... Alan Dershowitz did a seminar on the book he wrote about preemptive war.
Keep going, please.
And
yes.
she just came and discussed a problem from hell in that class. And that was sort of one of my, I just remember that experience. It was a important part of my graduate education.
So you were like a baby then, weren't you?
No, I was in graduate school.
But you were like, this was early on. I mean, this is a while ago.
This was like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were in your 20s.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I was in my 20s. I was about 26. No, 25 maybe. Yeah.
But anyway, wow.
I'm still a baby. What are you talking about?
You were in the same room as Samantha Power and you didn't call me? What's wrong with you? You know that I'm obsessed with her in a very not nice way. I think someone needs to write I'm serious. A dual biography. A biography of the couple of Samantha Power and Cass Sunstein.
Oh, Lord. Oh, yeah.
Right.
We could gossip now, but I won't do that.
Are you kidding me? That's what this show's for. It's for gossiping about Cass Sunstein and Samantha Power.
I don't want to think about Cass's sex life.
Isn't that... Ooh. I do. Okay, but first of all, no, right? Isn't that a book that needs to be written about that couple? Someone needs to write a book about that couple.
Sure.
That couple is the center of everything, basically, that's happened in the last, 40 years in international politics and domestic politics?
No, because they weren't a couple. He was with Marcela Nussbaum.
Yeah, but no, well.
So
okay.
they can't have been a couple. They weren't a couple for 40 years.
But they were.
But I'm seeing they were destined. They were on a trajectory, a collision course for each other.
Okay,
yeah,
so
probably true.
What's the gossip about Sunstein?
Oh, I can't.
Come on.
I have a job.
He won't listen to this.
No.
No one will know.
This is just gossip. I don't have anything to say. You're making it a story.
Heidi, this is just between you and me. I'm not going
to. Go back to the Nuremberg trial.
You think I would tell people? I'm not going to. Who do you think I am?
I don't have
just me.
Anything you
to whisper it. Okay, let's back up for a second.
But I didn't tell you the Nazis were bad. This is really important.
No. First, you tell me what you thought of Samantha Power when you were 26 years old and you heard this argument for the first time, I take it.
So
Which was that we should invade
yes, because the book had just come out.
Other countries to save people. Okay.
Right.
Okay. What did you think of it then?
I thought it was preposterous.
Even then?
Yeah, of course.
So you were
I've been skeptical of of law in general, but also in particular pro human rights warmongering for some time. And I think, partly that goes back to, I was like a second year university student when 9/11 happened. And
Okay,
it was obvious to me that this was happening.
Stop. Pause. Okay, hold on. Let's. So we have huge things to deal with right now. I want to organize them so that we do them properly. Okay. So first, let's do the Nazis and Nuremberg. What was that to you? What's your argument about the Nuremberg trials?
Right.
And the Nazis as not terrorists, and that it's better to be a Nazi in international law than to be a terrorist. Is that what you're saying?
Totally.
Why? I honestly don't know why.
So that's theoretically and practically true. The first part.
I'm sure you're right. I just don't know anything about this.
No. Yeah. So the first.
But I love it already. Keep going. Yeah.
So back to the Nuremberg trial. At the Nuremberg trial, there are different ways, of course, that you could, because it was the first time this had happened. So the Allies needed to come up with a legal theory and a strategy about how they were going to roll out these trials. In other words, what were they going to charge them with? What kind of evidence would they need? What would be their theory of the case? Whether they would use, so conspiracy was a huge mechanical part of this. It was a huge thing. Lots of moving parts. The basic story is that instead of going after the Nazis for being quote unquote barbaric, in other words, instead of going after the Nazis because they violated the law in war, right? Because they violated rules about, unnecessary cruelty and suffering or something like that, which they obviously did. And that was still part of the trial. The main crime with which they were convicted was the crime of aggression.
Whoa. Wait, what?
Yeah, the crime of aggression.
That's why they were hanged?
Yes.
Because they aggressed against others?
Yes. Yeah.
And this was the Allied forces, essentially.
Yeah. So actually the Soviets and the US agreed on this. And they
How do I not know
with
this?
some
why was this kept from me? This information. Really? That was the charge, and that's what they were convicted.
Well, they also
so what's
the way the
rationale?
charge went was this. They had crime of aggression, the crime of aggression in the also known as crimes of peace. Crimes against peace.
Oh, against peace. Yeah. Okay.
Not of peace, but whatever.
Yeah.
And then they also had war crimes and crimes against humanity, but war crime, and so a war crime is like, torturing or killing a POW or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those laws had been around since the 19th century, some of them even earlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They still prosecuted them for those crimes, but those crimes could only be prosecuted to the extent that they were actually committed in service of an aggressive war. And so if you look at the judgment is this whole long document. The whole first section of it is just setting out how basically since 1922 or 23, how Hitler and the Nazis had, in the words of the judgment, or my own paraphrasing of the judgment, basically, or maybe this was Robert Jackson, I don't know, it's in my dissertation with the direct quote, they had illegally usurped the form of the state. So in other words, they had taken control of the state in order to do bad things. So their politics...
It's amazing. Keep going. Yeah, no, it's just
their politics were bad.
It's hilarious.
It is hilarious. Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. But I mean, in some ways, it's interesting. So it's a complicated thing. But the basic contention was this. So the idea, the reason.
So running for president, according to this rationale, is not an attempt to take control of the state in order to do bad things. Is that right?
Well, I mean, what do you mean?
I'm saying within the rationale, that's what they're arguing?
No. They were saying that the Nazis were bad.
To seek state power when you're not a Nazi is not an attempt to seek, an attempt to do bad things with state power.
I think there would be. So again, a Nazi, you don't have to be not there. I'm sure they could have come up with other. So also to be a communist would be bad. But no. So okay. The basic. So what I'm saying here is that the Nazi political commitments. In other words, to take over Europe and maybe the world and to exterminate the Jews, although that was very secondary.
Totally not important to the Allies. I mean that. The Jews, they didn't give a shit.
Oh, no, they didn't. That's where I'm agreeing with you.
They really cared about Europe. And
this is why the judgment was framed this way. So now you understand. Got it. So what they didn't want was them to change the status quo in terms of global power, right? But so they were saying they in other words, they went about, they launched an illegal war, essentially.
Because they wanted control of what we want control of.
Yes.
Right. Okay. But obviously they didn't put it that way. But their rationale was
obviously that's what
it was an act of the Third Reich was an act of aggression. It was an attempt to use state power to do what? Evil? Did they use the word evil? By the way, did that
evil is not a huge part of the story. The story is really about the fact that the political system like the politics of the Nazis, like their substantive concrete positions were bad. In other words, opposed to U.S. interests.
Yeah.
Right. And so they created a crime to deal with it.
I almost want to stop this interview to go read this decision right now. This is I've been writing about this.
No, okay, right. That plays into your.
But I haven't gotten to that part of the chapter yet.
I can read my dissertation,
and so I will. I will because it's very clear to me and a lot of other historians. I'm hardly the first one to say this, that what the Roosevelt administration and sort of the foreign policy establishment and the establishment in the UK as well were, their entire concern really was about control of Europe. They never thought Hitler was going to really take over the rest of the world.
Right? So here's a piece you might have to get into some actual Soviet stuff, right? Because they were fully part of the Allies.
They wanted control of that industrial core of Europe, and they didn't want either Hitler or Stalin or anyone else who would close it off. The big word at the time was autarky. Yeah. That all the foreign policy journals at the time were the problem of autarky, because they saw autarky develop in Italy and then in Germany and then in Japan. And they said, that's what we can't have, because we need to have control of all those markets, all those resources, all those people, all that labor. So that was why Hitler had to go. Not because of the Jews, not because he was a mean guy, not because he put people in ovens or tortured people or did eugenics experiments on retarded people, etc. It's because he wanted to close off Europe from trade, from all exchange with the United States and the UK. So is that...
And that's better than being a terrorist.
But is that in the Nuremberg decision? Do they mention...
I mean, they don't say that. No, they make it sound like law.
But do they say anything about how he wanted to close off...
No, because they make it look like law.
Okay, so
that's why laws can be so dangerous.
I'm just trying to get how they rationalize this. Like, what? So they just left it at that. It's just
they were saying, look, that it was no. So the main rationalization, this has to do with the way that international law is structured, right? International law is structured around. See what you think about this. Actually, the basic principle, and you'll know this, but the basic principle is just the most important thing. And I'll just remind you, the basic principle in international law. Around which mostly all of it is organized, is state sovereignty. Right. So states are the base, are individuals on the international plane. They're the basic units of interaction. Right. Yeah. So all they had to say was that they violated state sovereignty. They don't have to say anything about their industrial interest. In fact, they were using arguments about sovereignty to hide their actual interests.
I see. So it was about Czechoslovakia and Poland.
Yeah, of course.
I see. Okay. That was the rationalization, that they invaded in other countries.
That's what war of aggression.
I see.
Right? Okay. But my and your argument, and others too, right? But the point is that if you frame the problem in that way and using that sort of internationalist legal language, what you actually do is hide the real power relations. And that's how concretely law operated as a motive or technology of power. And and so go ahead.
And so Abraham Lincoln should have been hanged because he invaded the South.
Well, I mean, that was you can reread that as aggression easily, of course.
Yeah. I mean, and that's just one of many presidents who should be hanged according to that rationale.
Okay, well, but and also the invasion of Iraq was like a war of aggression.
I mean, is there a president?
No, I'm just saying that. You can.
I don't think there's a president who shouldn't be hanging from a tree according to the rationale of the Nuremberg.
Well, today we don't support,
because they've all invaded other countries, sovereign countries, every single one of them.
That's true.
Including even Jimmy Carter was a part, essentially, of an invasion. He was sending our troops, usually in secret, but not always, into other countries to do what we wanted in those other countries. Those are invasions. Those are acts of aggression, according to what you're saying was the rationale. Every single president of the United States should be shot in front of a firing squad. Didn't they hang some of them? Some of the Nazis?
As I believe they hung them, but
they hang all
now,
of them?
No, there was one acquittal.
How'd they kill them? I want to know how they killed them.
I'm pretty sure they hung them.
They hanged them all, right?
Hang them is the word, yeah. But we don't endorse.
By the way,
capital punishment.
I'm agnostic on that, but in terms of the presidents, I will. It's fine. Like I'm not passionate about that question, whether they're hanged or shot. But I think they all need to go. We can do it retroactively, can't we? We can execute them in what's it called when you're dead? When you do something to someone who's dead, what's the word? There's a Latin term. You should know Latin. You're a lawyer.
I don't know.
Holy
I know what you're
Christ, Heidi.
Sorry.
Wait a minute. This is awesome. Okay, so okay, we did that.
And I'll tell you why that's better than terrorism.
Oh yeah. Why? So why is it better to be a Nazi than a terrorist?
It's better to be a Nazi than a terrorist because at least Their engagement with law was very far from transparent. In other words, they didn't, what we just talked about, they didn't actually acknowledge why they were using the law in the way that they did, right? So they didn't, and how the law was actually facilitating U.S.
You're talking about the jurists in the Nuremberg case. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
And like, because they were spokespeople for the government,
Sure.
right? Because the aggrieved party was the United. So, the harmed party there, in other words, is a state, right? So,
right.
So
they were the harmed party.
So they were representing the interests of the occupying Allied forces.
Right.
So, the reason why. So even though they weren't really being transparent about what they were doing, on one hand, they're more transparent than we are today with terrorists, in the sense that they had some kind of an argument about why Nazi politics were bad.
I see.
Now, as you and I both know.
I see. Okay.
Right?
Yes. They had to make an argument. They were forced to make an argument.
Not just that it's not just they were forced to make an argument. They were forced to engage with the other, with the Nazi other, as a political
actor.
That it's a mark of respect, in a way, discursive respect.
A political subject also.
A political actor who was made a subject.
Yep.
But another way, so you if you don't know Schmitt, like his whole theory of the friend-enemy distinction is important here, not for the reasons that people generally think, but for Schmitt, for example, it was a mark of, and he disagreed with me intensely about the function of the Nuremberg trial. That's a separate story. But his theory of the friend-enemy distinction would say, look, it's a mark of respect. It's respect to call somebody an enemy, because at least you're then acknowledging the political personhood of that other entity.
Right.
But when it comes to terrorism, we're taking that off the table entirely.
As far as I know.
So it's just basic subjugation.
We have not put any members of Al-Qaeda on trial.
No, I mean, there are terrorism trials in the U.S.
But not in the same way, though, right? They weren't. In other words,
well, so they're domestic trials. It's a different thing.
Their politics were not introduced.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I mean. So people were on trial, but the reason, but this is why we have terrorism in the law, so that you don't have to take their political opinions seriously. So that's why they can't. So a terrorist, once you call someone terrorist, it's impossible for them to come to be a legitimate belligerent on the battlefield, because by definition they're engaged in an illegal war. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that's the move.
Is it equivalent to murderer? I mean, is it? No. It's worse, right? Because it's also. I don't know. Is it?
So, well, I mean, if murder, the thing is, murder. We don't. The murderer is not making a political claim. In general.
No, right? I know, but I'm saying
that's the idea.
We're treating them as simple murderers, though, aren't we? Or is it more than that? In other words,
yeah. So, I see what you're saying. We're treating what we should be giving. We should be, yeah. I mean, sort of.
Well, but
I think it's a kind of a different.
So the word that keeps rattling around in my head, and I don't know if it fits here, but I did notice this.
We're not treating them. I'll tell you, we're not treating them as murderers in the war on terror, because because it's a war, which means you can just kill them, right? You don't have to arrest and try them, right? It's even worse, because you can. That's why drones can do what they do, right?
So you may have noticed.
So we can just kill them. We don't have to arrest and try them.
You may have noticed after 9/11 that when the unjust and just war argument was revived by Michael Walzer and others, right? They were arguing that the Iraq War and Afghanistan War were just wars. You may have noticed, although you were maybe too young, but you may have certainly read about it, that the other thing that was revived in fancy New York, Cambridge, Massachusetts intellectual circles was the concept and the word of evil. They actually, people like Walzer, Todd Gitlin, a whole bunch of lefty, sort of liberal lefty intellectuals who operating that, Dershowitz, I think was one of them, by the way, started saying, you know what, because we were taken by this cultural relativism stuff for decades, we got into trouble with these Middle Easterners.
Right. Yeah.
We stopped calling people evil. We stopped calling other cultures, other political ideas evil. Yeah. And we need to go back to identifying evil in the world. There is evil in the world. And this, ladies and gentlemen, flying airplanes into buildings is evil. Therefore, this is a just war. Therefore, you can't put them on. There's no point in putting their politics on trial like the Nazis, because they're not political. They're evil.
Yeah, I think that's by and large true. Yeah. So the invocation of evil, they're not political activists. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they're doing something else, right?
Yeah.
They're not doing politics.
Yeah. You don't talk.
Yeah.
If I believed in evil,
yeah,
right, and I thought you were evil, what's the point in talking to you and arguing with you
No,
and discussing
of course,
things
yes,
and
yeah.
asking you why you did certain things
Right.
and what is the justification?
Yeah.
I don't give a fuck that I did
Yeah.
this, that, and the other bad thing to you in the past, that I invaded your home and stole your stuff and, you know, used your things. You're evil. So you got to be done away with.
And, you know, and the thing
you must be removed from the world.
Totally. And the example they use to trot out this idea is like paradigmatically is a suicide bomber, right? So they say if somebody's willing, if someone's willing to kill themselves for their convictions, and obviously they're not political convictions, and there's no chance that we can change their mind, and therefore we should just kill them.
Yeah.
We didn't say that about, well, we kind of did say that about once you start dropping atomic bombs on the Japanese, you're kind of saying the same thing. But I was, you know.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, the Japanese.
So the start of this, you could maybe even say, I mean, I'd have to think about that, but it just occurred to me it might be the atomic bomb.
The category of evil, though, right?
Yeah.
Being deployed again. But I love, wow. So right, the Nazis were taken more seriously.
Yeah, totally.
Much more seriously.
And also partly there's a huge racial element to that, right? Like they were Europeans and they were white and everything. I mean, I think that, I don't know, I'm sure that plays into it because I think colonial wars.
Well,
I mean, we don't need to go that on that road, but I just want to like put that on the table as well.
Well, let's do that for a second. Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, it's true that Al-Qaeda and ISIS is made up of brown people and that Americans generally speaking,
and also not Christians,
have different ideas about brown people and non-Christians, and we tend to racialize them, right? As a racial other. Okay. All true. Which helps us to feel good when we kill them.
Yes.
And even their children, and even when their children are American citizens and only 15 years old.
Yes.
All true, I think, at least in part in explaining the so-called war on terror. However, there's nothing worse that's ever been done to human beings than what was done to white German people between 1941 and 1945 by the United States of America and Great Britain. There's nothing worse. They bombed entire cities and set them on fire.
I'm not interested in comparative harms because I don't think it's a useful way.
Well, I'm just saying.
But yes,
they were as white as me and you, or even whiter in some ways, right?
Yeah.
But you know, we set entire cities on fire and killed 10%, 20% of the entire something like German population or something like that. I mean, there's no Arab population that's ever suffered like that. No population on Earth has ever suffered like that at the hands of the United States. Even Japan, I think, possibly. I'm not sure what the numbers are, but I think in terms of percentages of people killed.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point.
They're the world champions of the oppressed.
Yeah, I just had to think that through
Seriously.
more. But that's a good point.
Those oppressed by the United States, the German people are the world champions. They are the world champion victims of United States aggression. It's just a fact.
No. I'm not. I'm just thinking through.
Yeah, I know you are. Yeah,
the structural implications of it, and legally, right? So maybe then my point was simply to say, like, yeah. I mean, obviously they, you know, maybe I'm saying from the perspective of the law, it's better to be a Nazi than a terrorist. But from the perspective of like how you get treated in court, but from the perspective of the civilian, they look to be about on the same footing.
Which leads us to another topic that you work on and you just recently published about, which is our treatment of German women, civilians, immediately after the war.
Yes.
This is exactly relevant.
Yeah.
Because, well, you tell us. I mean, what's your argument? What happened with German women after the war, immediately after the war, when the Soviet tanks roll into Berlin? Right.
So I've got so I'm not like the first to say, you know, I didn't reveal the rapes or anything that far from it. What I'm really interested in my research is the way that we
stop. Just hold on. I'm not sure people heard that. So I'm sure a lot of people know this, but we don't know the numbers, right? But it's widely, there's essentially a consensus. Am I right? I don't know if there's some denial about this, but there's almost a consensus that there was widespread rape by Soviet and American soldiers, of German civilian women in 1945 and 1946, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, okay. Yeah, no.
When they were under occupation.
Yes, and when the war was ending.
But who cares because they're all Nazis? Is essentially what we've thought about it.
And my piece was published 3 days ago on the anniversary of VE Day. And I got some really hateful
I bet you did.
feedback.
So what did you argue though? Why are you such a terrible person that you would defend Nazi women?
Yeah.
First of all.
And you know what? I wasn't even defending them. That was the point. So you
know what percentage of German civilians were members of the Nazi Party, right? Like it was single digits the entire time. A tiny minority of Germans were Nazis, yes.
Like, yes, that's true.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm not sure what that has to do. Okay, so
well, but no, that's what do you mean?
No, because there's a different argument. So so that is true, absolutely.
You understand that Americans are very stupid people, and they all think that.
I'm sorry.
All Germans were Nazis, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're just making yes, of course.
And that's why we don't care that German women were raped because they were Nazis and probably deserved it.
Now, although
even if our little tiny American minds even went that far, that's I'm sure what we would think as
sure
idiot Americans.
I see your point now. Yeah,
and I mean all of that, by the way, Americans.
You're gonna make me the bad Canadian here too, but so Canadians did it too, and
that's true.
As the British,
that's
and
right.
Nobody's special in this regard, right?
That's right.
Everyone was raping.
Have you seen the Brad Pitt movie, the tank of I forget the name of it, Fury? He's a tank commander in the war.
Oh, do you know I haven't? Yeah.
And it's the closing days of the war, and they take control of some town in Germany. And Brad Pitt's like the commander of the tank battalion, and he stops, I think, or no, he doesn't stop, or he tries to stop some of his own soldiers from raping some German women in their apartment.
I haven't seen it.
I think they did, or they were going to. Anyway, it was like, oh shit, but it's not bad. Like they dealt with the question fairly honestly. In other words, they showed American good old GIs in World War II who have been nothing but heroes until this moment. Hollywood did this. I can't believe it. Showed them as fucking rapists, raping women under occupation.
Yeah.
Which.
It's pretty brutal.
Yeah. Don't you think? And we have given them a pass until now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're all Nazis. So what the fuck?
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, it's true. We also know now that the level of complicity and actual participation on the part of non-card holding German civilians was much greater than we've acknowledged in the past as well. Now, again, I'm not saying that anybody deserved it or was asking for it.
Wait, participation in what?
Just so within German society and outside of it, right? There's the idea that ordinary Germans didn't know really what was going on, and even and correlatively to that, the idea that the Wehrmacht, like ordinary armed forces, like not the SS, right? Like just ordinary soldiers didn't know about the camps and et cetera, and they were just fighting an ordinary war and whatever, and that's all been debunked in the last 15 years or so.
There's a debate. So
no, there is a huge debate, but the Daniel Goldhagen stuff is about the civilians, and there's absolutely a debate about that. Okay. And I don't really have a dog in that fight.
Thank you. Okay. Yes.
And there's, I'm just putting that out there as like a debate. So it's true that the actual Nazis.
Did Wehrmacht officers know about the camps? Sure.
Yeah, of course. And there's all,
yeah,
but there's also like a lot of new research saying that, and it wasn't just Wehrmacht officers, at the level of knowledge. Now, that doesn't mean that they could have done anything, and it doesn't mean that they should have done anything. Let me be clear about that. We shouldn't draw any conclusions based on simple knowledge.
Right.
But the idea that like they just didn't know is wrong.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But again, that doesn't.
But German civilians is an entirely different.
Oh no, of course. Yeah. And I'm
90% of the Wehrmacht was draftees for one thing.
No, of course. Okay. I'm not saying that makes. I'm just saying they knew more than they said they knew.
Yep.
What you do with that normatively is a different question.
Okay, we haven't even touched on what your really important argument is.
The point was my interest is this actually flips back to MacKinnon.
Isn't this amazing?
It is. I hadn't realized all these connections.
Me
so I'm really glad that I did this
awesome.
interview because it helps my research so much as well.
Blowing me away.
So thanks,
It's blowing me away.
Yeah, it's totally cool. What am I trying to say?
Catherine MacKinnon. Oh yeah. Agency.
So we'll get there, but
it's about agency, right? MacKinnon, German women.
Yes.
Agency.
Essentially.
Right? Okay.
So yes, there were massive rapes of German civilian women.
Probably. We don't know for sure, but most likely, right?
There were massive rapes.
Well, probably. I just been very careful about all claims unless there's real evidence. And
there was, depends on how many numbers you want to call massive, but there was a huge amount of sexual violence. But part of my argument is that there was also.
Well, wait. Okay. Pause once again. What is the evidence for this?
There's just tons of
what
historians that have done work on this.
Right. What's the evidence?
So Jeffrey Birds is one historian.
But what's the evidence that you've seen?
So accounts of women. All sorts of stuff. Like,
testimony.
Well, either testimony or there was a huge sort of
I'm not denying it.
No, but I'm just trying to help you. There's a huge, so Atina Grossman is a historian who's done a huge amount of work.
Former colleague of mine at Columbia.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. She's great on, so maybe you know this already, but for your audience, the what's the word for surgeons? A surge rather of requests by women to have approved abortions. Because of there is a impregnation, right? Yeah, so basically, many more women. Because, I mean, I don't.
Could still be consensual sex, right? That can produce that.
That's true, and that did happen.
Yeah.
But I think there is a huge amount of just survivor testimony. I myself personally interviewed 8 survivors.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't think they were lying to me. I think. In Germany,
German
yes.
women. Okay, yeah,
German women survive.
Okay, yeah. Oh no, I mean, I have.
No, I'm just saying. And there's a colleague of mine. I mean, whatever. Like, I can send you like Philip Kuvert at the University of Greifswald in Germany did a big PTSD study. He's a psychiatrist.
Okay,
so there's a lot of.
Okay, but so I have lots of reasons to believe that this happened.
Yeah. I don't think
it's just that I've never seen actual evidence of it, and I'm not contesting anything you've said.
Yeah,
but here's the important point I'm actually making here.
Right.
Is that, as you very well know, because this is what your work is all about, right? The alleged sexual violation of women has been used historically for all kinds of very
that's my
bad
MacKinnon point.
Purposes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So anytime there's an allegation of rape, and especially mass rape, I'm sorry, everyone. You must be skeptical, because I am telling you, it has been the primary rationale for some of the worst things that human beings have ever done to each other, in particular nation states over the last 200 or so years.
Right. And so there's, one can just think about all the purported rapes that ISIS is undertaking or whatever in the Middle East right now.
For fuck's sake, in Cuba, in 1898, the main rationale for the invasion of that country was that the Spanish were allegedly raping the Cuban women. It goes on and on and on.
No, absolutely.
So you've got to be really, really careful, and you've got to see evidence of it.
No, I can.
You know what's horrible though is for the women who actually do get raped in those circumstances, because it's unfortunately you have to do this, because otherwise you're going to have World War II on your hands, or World War I, or the Spanish-American War, or then World War III. Anyway.
So. Yeah, that's
okay. So
I'm on board with that.
So let's stipulate that these did happen. Okay.
We will, and I. That's convinced fine. That they did, but I think your overall point is right, and I have more to say about that later. But so my research then focuses, not so much on the specific details of those rapes, but precisely what you just said, the way in which, in other words, current political actors in Germany are mobilizing or instrumentalizing narratives of sexual violence in order to achieve specific political outcomes, right? And this is where that portion of my work, I think.
Pause. Fuck. I don't know why this is not charging. It's okay. I haven't lost anything, but it's just not. Okay. The libertarians have the highest IQ of all the ideologies. Seriously, John Haidt's done the work. He's shown this. No, seriously, which is not necessarily a compliment to libertarians. But anyway, okay. So where were you?
Right. So I think what I was trying to say was that the work that I'm engaged in, a large part of it with respect to these rapes, in other words, the Allied rape of German civilian women at the end of the war and during occupation, is because I'm interested in the way we tell stories today, right? So about those rapes in order to achieve concrete political outcomes.
You were saying, though, that the current German political leaders are using the rapes for what purposes?
Yeah. So sections of the German political system, I don't want to be too simplistic about it, but so there are obviously a resurgence of neo-Nazism in Germany, particularly in the former East, for all sorts of reasons, including economic ones, but also just much more moderate conservatives or other pretty far right people as well thrown in there. Basically, there's been over the last, say, 10 to 15 years, the stories about remembering these rapes have coincided with a set of memory projects culturally within German society that focus on so-called ethnic cleansing of German populations at the end of the war pursuant to Allied policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so just to tell people...
The forced removal of Germans, yes. But go ahead, yeah.
So basically, so what happened was the territory and population of the Third Reich in the 30s and 40s was very different from what we now know as modern Germany.
The geography of it.
Yeah, so it extended into Poland and parts of what's now Russia. There was also East Prussia, which is now Russia, right? And parts of Czechoslovakia, right? So it was a much bigger landmass, and there were ethnic Germans in all of these areas. And at the end of the war, and this had to do with a partition of territory and the administration of the occupation, Churchill came up with a plan that involved the forcible mass population transfer of like millions and millions of ethnic Germans from those areas into what's now Germany.
No one knows about this. No Americans, even American, I think, historians are basically unaware of this.
It's one of, if not the biggest forced population transfer,
in world history.
Yeah,
it's probably the biggest.
I've read that some accounts that it's the biggest.
Yeah,
no one
knows about it, and no one cares, Heidi, because guess why? They were Nazis. And I'm not kidding you.
No,
I have had this conversation with many super intelligent, highly educated people who are even professional historians, and when things like this come up, they either are just blank or they'll actually say, "Yeah, but there were Germans." Yeah. Okay, so
that happened, but it was
why are you defending
prefigured.
Nazis?
So this happened. There were various stages and various levels of organization to it, of course. A big book, I've forgotten the author's name, but came out a couple of years ago about this and was profiled in the Nation, whatever, right? But anyway, this was preceded by simply the fact that the Red Army was sweeping westward, right? So they were in the race for Berlin at the end of the war, the last.
Who's going to get it first? Joe or Franklin?
Yeah.
Well, Harry. But then
Franklin. There was even an internal battle in like amongst Soviet commanders about like which one of them would even get there first, right?
Oh yeah,
so, yeah,
I didn't know that, yeah.
So this, so the Soviets were coming and they were taking over all these areas in the Eastern Front that had all these ethnic Germans in them, and raping as they go along. And so but before we get to the rapes, the part about the population transfer is that these people started fleeing the Russians, and so they ended up going westward into Germany. And then when the actual population transfer was underway, they were not permitted to go back home, right? So they've got claims about a right of return to their ethnic homelands.
The
now.
Original Palestinians.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, oh my God. Yes. I mean, they have a structurally similar claim.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
They do.
No one knows this.
Yeah.
God damn it. Keep going. Keep going.
Right. So that's the fact of the population transfer. And so factually speaking, a lot of this sexual violence that we've posited happened took place when the Soviets were essentially pushing them and they were fleeing. And then it also happened during the occupation. But I think so the idea that historians believe that like kind of the worst, like it was all bad, but the worst portion of this was in like a 4-week period in April 45 and into May 45. Really the last days of the war with the Soviets, but obviously it went over a longer period of time. So basically the German experience, like for these people who fled and or were forcibly expelled and then prevented from returning, many or most of these people were actually women and children, right? Because of course, like and old men.
The men are all dead.
Right, the men were dead or on the front, right?
Yeah, seriously, all dead.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
So this is by and large women and children.
Because we killed all of them, pretty much. We did a really good job of killing basically all of them. But anyway, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because I just don't think like the American or Western psyche could deal with the amount of actual.
We killed an entire generation of men.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really.
Yeah. No, I know.
It's amazing, and no one cares. You know why? Keep going.
In which Thad and Heidi become neo-Nazi. Yeah,
we're not that bad. We're just Nazi apologists,
right?
But keep going.
And rape apologists.
Keep going.
So, anyway, part of that experience, so that experience was combined with a whole host of harms, because when you endure being forcibly expelled, you lose your property. Your property gets taken by the people that come there. Which means your land and also all your stuff. You like starve. You might get sick. You might die. In fact, a lot of them died. Or you can be sexually violated.
Mm-hmm.
And so sexual violence was a huge part. Was part and parcel of this story of expulsion.
Just adding to this context,
Yeah.
So this by 1945. The typical Soviet soldier was not a huge fan of the German people, let's just say. This was the worst war. The war within the war between Germany and the Soviet Union was the worst loss of life in a human conflict still in human history by far. And there's not even a close second. There's nothing. They were killing each other at rates that is so dramatic. The human mind can't really make sense of it. Tens of thousands of people per day on both sides. So the hatred was as deep as it gets on both sides. So when the Soviet tanks come rolling into Berlin and these other cities and towns in Germany, those tanks are full of men. Well, not all of them, but I'm sure many or most of them were ready to go to take some vengeance for all of their dead brothers.
No, absolutely. And well, not just for that, for the fact that the Germans on the Eastern Front had been doing their own sexual violence against civilians, right?
And then shooting the women in the head after raping them. Sure.
That happened too, right? So so there was a lot of vengeance for the brutality in general of the war in the Eastern Front, but and also for the sexual component of it. Not just for that, but for that as well.
Right.
Because
they raped our women,
sexually brutal.
So we're going to rape theirs.
Exactly.
Yeah, of course.
Exactly.
Fucking Christ.
There was it's crazy.
Jesus Christ. You know who supplied the bulk of the weaponry to the Soviet Union in that war? You know who it was? It was Detroit, near you. Most of the big stuff by the end of the war, most of the bullets and shells and steel that went through people's bodies in that particular part of the war came from right here in the good old USA. But anyway, continue, Heidi.
Yeah. No, it's brutal stuff.
So we haven't even gotten to your argument yet.
No, but so that's the sort of historical background. Now, in terms of the present day, two things have happened that I'm trying to take stock of and put in conversation with one another. And they're both contemporary cultural memory projects in German society. And so there's been a general turn over the last 20 years, let's say, to the beginnings of the ability within Germany, but also outside of it, to talk about Germans as victims, which had been, for the reasons you just told us, actually completely impossible.
Yeah, we don't do that.
We've never done it.
They can't be victims.
Right. It's the idea.
And we know why.
Yeah. No, the idea that you could be both a victim and a perpetrator, right, is somehow assuming that people did hold that double status. But for the purpose of my argument, even assuming they were all Nazis, which obviously they weren't, but even assuming that they were,
right, you
can still be a victim and a perpetrator at the same time.
That's right.
So it doesn't even matter, right, if they were not,
right.
From a logical perspective.
Yeah.
So anyway, so there's been a large move to talk on, and I think in many ways, probably a needed one, because if you want to actually do history and think about what really happened, German suffering is actually a big left out part of the story, or had been a big left out part of the story. Now, the turn internally, obviously there are different ways that this can happen, but it's the conservative and right wing, far right political movements have made a big meal out of this, though, right? So it's a big part of their political platform and policy agenda.
Yeah, so wait, how's that work? How are they using it specifically?
So it's just kind of let me think. So how can I best answer this? It's a really good, so the stories about German national victimhood shore up shore up and maintain general nationalist sentiment in the country. And that nationalist sentiment can be used to do a whole host of things, but inform immigration policy, for example. As sort of, I would just think that's the most obvious one right now.
Yeah.
So the way that we keep the immigrants out is related to the fact that we were forcibly expelled from East Prussia 70 years ago. Yeah. So there are these continuities in terms of narrative structure. What I'm interested in is the specific way in which the sexual violence, the story about sexual violence, is being, in part, not in whole, but in part woven into the right-wing story that focuses around the expulsion. And so a whole host of memory projects, including like an actually now federally funded new like research institute to document and actually research and like have a museum sort of about the expulsion has happened.
So the Germans themselves have not allowed themselves to portray those people as victims until just now.
Yes.
And in fact, there's still pushback, right?
Yes.
I'm sure Angela Merkel is not a big fan of this.
She sort of like, she allowed it to have, like, there's been some like bargaining, right? I mean, this obviously but it crosses a wide spectrum of the society. So I don't want to say it's all just alt-right people. And I think part of the reason why, you're right. The fact that German victimhood was silenced for so long plays in again to its utility to the right, because it just furthers their own narrative of current victimization. Right? You didn't allow us, our fathers and mothers, to talk about.
We were raped.
Right, and now there's intergenerational violence because of that.
We were raped. We were penetrated. No, really. So that was Hitler's argument. We were penetrated by Jews, by foreign influences. That's why he wanted to close off the country. That's why he wanted to institute autarky. Isn't it interesting, right? The connections here. So
and aggression is all about penetration, right? As a crime, right?
Yeah, Catherine MacKinnon. Here we go. Yeah. It's all coming together.
So
here. Wow.
Yeah, it's cool.
Holy shit.
I hadn't realized the continuities in my
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
So basically that's
you still haven't gotten to your argument, which is
my argument is like
so radical and provocative, and you're going to get in so much trouble when they find out about it. Even though you just wrote an article.
I did, which like 70,000 people read, which is
they're going to kill you for this, which is.
Well, I said that what did I say? I mean, that the memory of the rapes is being used to further right-wing projects. You don't think
you said something else in there?
I'm sorry, the agency part. Oh, yeah, okay, sure. And not only that, and that's it. Yeah, fine. These two things play.
You made a claim about the German women.
Sure. So
who were raped.
Right. So
allegedly raped.
Right. So the idea is that I want to contest, I don't buy the narrative of suffering, the narrative of, in other words, the totalizing victimhood narrative that is being deployed and is being deployed in MeToo as well.
Pause. Totalizing. Say that again.
The totalizing victimhood narrative.
Boom. I love that. What does that mean?
So it just means that sexual violence, whether it's MeToo sexual violence or this wartime sexual violence I've been describing, it means that the only way the primary focus is on as the woman as violated victim, right? And not as participant in a sexual encounter itself. And so while it's obviously true that whether we're talking about within, just regular society, obviously rape happens. And obviously during war, rape happens. We know that, as I just said, we know that that's a case at the end of the World War in Germany. But what we also know is that frequently in wartime, women basically operate within a complex sexual economy, right? And it's very common, I think, in most conflicts. Certainly was in Germany at this time, but elsewhere too. Very common for women to exchange sexual, and I don't just mean in a straight up like sex work way, but to exchange various iterations of sexual experience, or to accept a certain level of what we might otherwise understand as like victimization, to obtain a concrete material good, right? So whether it be actual survival or protection or food or whatever, right? So, and that it's not okay to remember sex that happens in war as being exclusively about rape or about victimization in that way, right?
Okay.
Right.
So you're going to get killed. They're going to kill you for this. So what?
Yeah, I mean, it's just true.
Well, let's be really clear here. So, like, one of the things that invading soldiers in World War II, I think in most wars, but certainly in World War II, really liked was getting souvenirs, right, from the enemy. Go look in the house of a World War II veteran right now from the Soviet Union or the United States or Canada or Great Britain. Right. You're probably going to find some Nazi something or other in their house that they pulled as a souvenir, right? So here you are rolling up in your tank and you don't look like Brad Pitt, right, into some German village. And you see this apartment building or whatever, and you go in there and they got stuff, they got stuff in there that's cool. And some of it's valuable. And there's women in there and there's boys in there. Right. And you might want to just kill the boys because it turns out that the Wehrmacht was so short of manpower by 1945 that they were using 14-year-old boys to shoot stuff. These troops coming in here, these dumb shit 19-year-olds from Kansas or wherever, or Moscow, are coming in and they might want to kill your brother and they want to take your stuff because you got some nice jewelry that might be valuable. And so instead you say, hey, I like you. Yeah. You're cute. Let's go into the bedroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and what you're saying is what about that? That was not rape?
Yeah, not necessarily. It's not necessarily rape. Now, do you want MacKinnon to come back in yet?
Jesus, she's here already.
Because she's here. So MacKinnon, what MacKinnon did, and I'm using her for shorthand for a whole group of feminist activists, right? Mm-hmm. Was that they managed to make the law, because international law is when we came back, basically there was the Nuremberg trial, not a lot of formal international criminal law happened during the Cold War. We only got it back with international criminal law. We only got it back with the war in the former Yugoslavia and the creation of a UN tribunal to deal specifically with that war. There are two things here. Feminists immediately started agitating for rape and sexual violence to be a priority from a matter of prosecutorial strategy. So they wanted to focus on the prosecution of rape and sexual violence. And then they also needed, of course, because this was a new court and it was international law, they needed to come up with the substantive law. Like what would the law of rape be? Because the way that you can deal with rape in all sorts of different ways. There's no set law. So they needed to figure out what were going to be the elements of the crime of rape in wartime. And the big question was whether what the role of consent would be in the elements of the crime. Mm-hmm. And over time, we are in a situation right now where if you look at the documents from the International Criminal Court, basically my story is that and the story of others who've worked on this, I'm not the only one, that MacKinnon and her ilk have succeeded in taking consent really as an operative category out of the crime, such that if you can prove the sex took place in coercive circumstances, that's the actual terminology,
right,
then a woman could not have consented, and therefore a defendant cannot claim consent as a defense.
And what you want to say, Heidi Matthews, am I right, is that all circumstances are coercive?
All circumstances in life everywhere. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the question is, what do you do about that?
Right.
So of course it's true. Obviously it's true that depending on the level, on the situation, but most wartime situations are going to be more coercive than ordinary life. That might be true.
Right.
On the other hand, if you live in sub-Saharan Africa, and you have nothing, and you're, and I don't mean in war, just in peacetime, you're also living under incredibly coercive circumstances. So it's, let's not be under any illusions, though, about what that means. Now, again, if you were Robin West, we talked about this earlier, just to bring this back. If you were Robin West, you'd be like, yeah, okay, so fine. We need to get rid of the coercive circumstance.
All coercion, yeah.
You need to get rid of all coercion or whatever with respect to sex. And I'm saying the idea of agency, not to make it like necessarily the end all and the be all and the answer to everything, but to just point out that agency persists in moments that are coercive, right?
Okay, nice.
Right?
Nicely done. Yes, I like that formulation. Okay.
And so while it's obviously true that some circumstances will be so coercive that agency, it's no longer really meaningful to talk about agency, those are not all coercive circumstances, and that where there are credible...
There are circumstances where it's not meaningful, where there is no agency that's meaningful?
I mean, I think if... sure.
I think it's always meaningful.
Yes, you might be right philosophically. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
You might very well be right. But I'm talking about from the point of view of regulation. So what the law should do.
Excellent.
Which is different.
Exactly. Okay.
Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's a different question.
Yep.
So, but the problem is currently we're unable to think that thought. And that's very, very harmful.
That's right. We are incapable of holding that thought or even conceiving of it.
Yeah, no one's talking.
We can't do it. No. It's taboo. It's taboo.
Mm-hmm.
It is taboo to have that thought.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, that's fair.
That's why you're here.
Yeah. So, so whether it's wartime or it's just general, Me Too in regular life. And part of the reason why, I mean, who knows why, but maybe one reason why Me Too has become so popular is that it's given us a way of talking about MacKinnon's old idea that patriarchy means we are in an everyday war on women. Those are her words.
Yeah.
I think that's what Me Too is. A lot of Me Too is suggesting.
Huh. It's a war on women.
Yeah, an everyday war on women.
In which is not meaningfully different than Soviet tanks rolling into Berlin and putting a gun to a woman's head and telling her if she doesn't take her clothes off, she'll be shot. I mean, I think that they conflate. There's a conflation. There is a conflation. I think that there is, a difference. I call current identity politics the great conflation, because you may have noticed that everyone talks about what happens in the past all the time when they talk about identity politics. It's almost as if the last 50 or 60 or so years didn't even happen. So it's all about slavery and Jim Crow, and it's all about rape, the historical rape of women, and when they're talking about what's going on right now, it's very tricky. So before I forget, I should note as well that when they were rolling out their policy, so I just described a situation in which the right is using a narrative about the rapes to achieve nationalist purposes. Right. But radical feminists used a narrative, and this is a large part of my work, radical and a unique contribution as far as I'm concerned. Radical feminists in the early 90s and continuing through today also used a narrative about the Soviet rapes in Germany to achieve a specific set of policy reforms. So the narratives can be mobilized on all sides of the political spectrum. And I think, we just need to be clear about why, who's mobilizing them and why. The story that MacKinnon and others told in the early 90s with respect to the Bosnian wars was that we need one of the ways they tried to heighten the importance of prosecuting rape and sexual violence at the International Tribunal was to say we didn't do it well enough after World War II. They said I call this the feminist failure narrative in my work. They have a narrative about the failure of legal apparatuses to deal with the rapes of German civilian women in the Nuremberg trial and subsequent trials in the occupied zones. This was a huge failure, and international criminal law needs to be made better. And one way we're going to do that is to prioritize sexual violence. And this is really remarkable. It's explicit. It comes up in if most mainstream pieces about war and rape will reference there's also a lot of talk about the comfort women in the East, in the Far East. Yeah, okay, can bracket that, but they also bring up the Soviet, and they generally talk about them as Soviet
right?
Okay.
Rapes of German women. It's totally fascinating.
So what has this meant in terms of actual law? Like, what did they achieve? Is it simply, it's easier, complainants are now have an easier time of it?
Yeah, it's easier it's absolutely easier to prove. It's kind of, well, if you think about it, if we're going to accept the idea that war is basically always coercive circumstances, and we have to, since I'm saying all life is coercive, but even for these feminists, they're going to say, it'd be hard to say, a wartime situation is not coercive, then it's impossible, really, once you prove sex happened. How are you going to prove that it was consensual? It's not. You can't.
Right.
The law doesn't allow you to do that. So once sex happens between an enemy soldier and a civilian, it's like perforce rape.
Yeah.
Or sexual violence.
Damn. So I'm actually right now having a problem, which is this. So I love your argument, and I'm generally on board with it, and it's more or less. It's in line with the way I talk about these things and think about these things. However, I'm also friends with a lot of sex workers. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that sex workers will tell you is that rape by cops is common for sex workers because the cops have the monopoly on violence and power. Mm-hmm. And what they will do is they'll pull over a streetwalker, put him in the back of the cruiser, mm-hmm. and say, so, a blowjob keeps you out of jail tonight. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of people say, oh, well, you can't rape a sex worker because they sell their bodies. So they can't be raped. Okay. Those are not me and not you, but that's one thing that's said. What sex workers say, and I think some feminists, the few feminists who actually care about what sex workers experience say, is that it is by definition necessarily rape. Because that woman has no agency, because he has all of the power of the state with him. And I don't know where I am on this now.
Right. Yeah.
The other example I have, is slave women. Right? Slave women. It has been said that there is no such thing as sex between a slave woman and a non-slave man that is not rape. That it is necessarily rape. It's essentially a MacKinnon-esque argument.
Yeah, I don't think I can buy that argument.
So I don't know what to do here.
Yeah, I think you got to let it go.
Really?
Yeah. Now, from a policy,
seriously, what do you say to that?
But from a policy perspective, that doesn't. You know what I mean? Like, there's a difference between saying it's like there can be agency in a situation, and yet you can still say, from a policy perspective, because law is about organizing power relations, right? And you can organize them in all sorts of ways. From a policy perspective, it might nevertheless be a good idea to call it rape, even if I think there's meaningful agency here. Mm-hmm. You can take that decision from a policy perspective. Okay. That's one answer to that. The second answer to that is to draw directly on Duncan Kennedy's work on from the early 90s on called Sexy Dressing. And he's saying, look, he talks about the law of sexual abuse and rape and what he calls the tolerated residuum of abuse. That's his word in that article. And the basic idea there is to say that no law is the law of sexual abuse is not designed to get rid of all sexual abuse, right? It just organizes the pathways through which certain forms of abuse are tolerated and other forms of abuse are not tolerated. And you can decide to structure the laws this way or that way. So my answer to you, and you're not going to like this either, but with respect to the cops and the sex workers, is to say, yeah, the problem there is the way that the law organizes power. So sex work shouldn't be illegal.
Oh, well, I love that. Of course I love it.
Right,
Okay.
but that solves the problem.
But that's it. Okay. You want to just leave it at that?
No, I don't. I gave you one answer, which is a policy answer. And the second answer is, but I think this is important, and this is maybe where we differ, but that's why I think that the way that we need state power, I don't think is a bad thing. And if the state organizes, the state's approach to sex work is organized differently, it could, from your perspective or the perspective of sex workers, who I also want to empower, of course, and who I work with as well,
Yeah.
Give them agency, right?
Yeah.
So the state decides to organize its law around sex and sex work and the exchange of sex for money differently. And those workers are better empowered. That can include things like unionization as well. So there's a strong socialist case for from that perspective.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
No, well, you don't have to buy it. You don't even have to go all the way down that road. You can agree with me, even if you don't agree with unionization of sex workers. You can still agree that what we need to do is change the way that the law distributes power, and we don't have that problem anymore.
Yeah. So I don't know of any sex workers who have said that sex with a cop was consensual in any way. Maybe, but they could
that's
exist.
Again a policy.
But hang on.
They could exist.
But they could totally exist. Okay, I haven't heard them, but it could totally exist. Here's who I do.
That's also a strategy question.
Here's who I know does or did exist.
Right.
Many slave women, at least in this country, and probably in others, but certainly in this country, because I've seen their own words in which they have said, this was my lover, this was my paramour, this was the guy I was with. They never described it as rape.
Yeah.
And from what we can tell, they simply didn't think of it as rape.
Sure.
Now, what is being said about those women now by many people is that they were wrong about their own experience, that it was rape by definition.
False consciousness.
Yeah. Right. And so that's the thing, right? We can't do that. It just kills me to say to a sex worker now, because we don't have slaves anymore, but we do have sex workers who experiences, it kills me to say that to a sex worker who's had that happen to them with a cop. Like, what do you say?
But I
you had agency in that moment?
Look, it would really depend on the facts of the situation as well, right? Like, let's please be clear about that, right? Like, the amount of meaningful agency depends on the facts of the circumstance, right? Like, whether the cop pulled his gun on her or not. For example,
I don't think my friend Maggie McNeil would say circumstances matter. I think I can speak for her, but on this question,
I'm going to say that circumstances always matter because there are varying coercion
for
can
her,
be.
I think.
No, I agree. Well, I would disagree.
But I think I might have to disagree with her. I might have to agree with you, and it's hard. But I think
it is tough. And
nonetheless,
I'm glad that you just drew that comparison. It's very useful.
Good. Let me be really clear, though. What? Well, no, I don't know. Like, should there be an absolute law, right, that applies to all acts, all sex acts between law enforcement officers and sex workers? You know what I mean? That's the crux of it. That's the issue, isn't it?
Well,
do we decide a priori what that is and what the punishment is, or do we go case by case?
Question. I think that's a policy question. It doesn't really reflect
the
quote unquote reality.
As you said at the very beginning of this interview,
yeah,
policy is law, and law makes things permanent. It reifies morality and makes it permanent.
Oh, no. Yeah, but no. So let me clarify that. So that's true. That's where law gets its authority, is its ability to do that. But that doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater. It doesn't mean you get rid of, now, not from my perspective, unless you're some kind of anarchist, you would think that. I don't think we can get rid of law, or we should get rid of law. Law can be an organized society in better and worse ways. And what we really need to do, and this is a critical legal studies point, is not to say, oh, just because law can reify morality, it's bad. No, we need to strategize and mobilize about how to use law to achieve the substantive political aims we want. And you're talking about a substantive political aim of increasing the freedom and agency of sex workers. And I'm on board with you in that. I would add to that increasing the ability of sex workers to have proper work conditions, proper remuneration, proper safety, etc. Now, do you see my point? So that this is a strategizing point about law. Just because it would be really silly to say law gets its authority based on like a false idea, a pretty false idea about its relationship to reality, and to then say, well, that means we get rid of it. That's silly.
Okay. So what if the cop pulls the streetwalker over, says, no, doesn't even pull her into the car. Just he gets out of the car, walks up to her and says, will you asks for a blowjob. He asks for a blowjob.
Is that the Louis C.K. situation?
And then, no, hold on. This is hypothetical, but it's really important.
Right.
And then gets a blowjob, and that's the end of it. He drives away and it's over. Okay. Now, what I'm saying is many feminists and many sex workers now would say that that is rape no matter what else happens. That any sex between a cop and a sex worker is rape. Okay.
Yeah.
You're saying you wouldn't want to treat it that way. You're saying that other circumstances should be taken into consideration when deciding what the proper response is by the state to that.
And I also think
And what would it be, though? So in other words...
Well, I mean, that really depends. And I also think that you're drawing, too, on your experience with some sex workers, but I'm sure that there are multiple people that would say that that's not necessarily rape,
you,
right?
What would exonerate the cop? What would make him innocent of rape?
I mean, so let me be clear about that. I'm not. So here's the thing. I don't have a set of policy prescriptions about how we should reform the law of rape. I do not. I don't think I need one to have this critique.
Yeah, fair enough.
Also going to say this. Right now, the law looks to consent and right, and the question would be whether consent depends on your jurisdiction, how you approach consent, whatever. But the fulcrum of the discussion would basically be about consent, and different jurisdictions have different approaches to like whether you can consent in situations that have that kind of power differential, et cetera. But my basic idea about all of this, and it comes out in the other piece that I wrote recently that you mentioned, was I don't think consent itself is a useful way of thinking through social regulation of sexual life and interactions. So I actually, and this is even more extreme because your sex workers are going to like that either. So I reject the idea that it's now, again, this is a policy question. It might turn out at the end of the day that the best way we have at our disposal of thinking about these problems and about organizing them through regulation might be consent. But I think we have to have that very difficult discussion first.
Jesus, this is hard. This is hard.
No, I know.
Because
I know
so in my hypothetical, the sex worker, streetwalker says, sure, I'll give you a blowjob, and goes down on him, and that's it, right? And so again, to a lot of people, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what she thought. So would you take that into account?
Okay, that's even worse.
See, there we go with agency, though, right?
Yeah.
So would you take that into account? In other words, for me, I guess what I want to say, and this makes me a Me Too person, is that what the woman thinks happened is maybe what happened. I don't know what to do here.
There are different approaches to that. So, and you don't have to have an answer.
I don't know what to do here. He's got all the state power, though.
But this is the question that I want us. This is the discussion I want us to have. Like the whole point of my work is to have these sorts of discussions.
I want to kill the cop. No, I don't want to kill the cop because what if she actually liked the guy? It's possible for her to actually like it.
She doesn't even have to have liked him. All she has to have done is agreed to the activity with some degree of meaningful agency.
It's really clear that a lot of slave women actually liked the masters they had sex with. It's really clear.
Oh no, of course. I'm willing to accept that's true, but I'm saying analytically they don't have to like.
No, you're more to the left and or whatever you are, radical on this than I am. I think you're pushing me on this, and it's really.
Yeah.
I don't think you've given me an answer though.
No, I don't need to give you an answer. My whole job here is to force us to have this conversation.
What are you, like a professor or something? Academics.
No, there are two, but with respect to the consent question, just to digress for a moment, whether or not what we need to worry about is what the woman thought. Again, different jurisdictions have different approaches to this. In Canadian law, for example, the court looks to what the woman subjectively thought at the time.
That's the Me Too answer. Believe the woman. Not only
Me Too goes farther in saying maybe she can revise that later on.
So in the case...
And other jurisdictions don't look at that. They look at whether consent was present.
There's something different, though. Hang on. Here's the thing.
Go ahead.
It's about state power, right? So when the man has the state power at his disposal,
but then you have to accept patriarchy.
Then it's just. I feel like it's just different. That's it. I guess that's where I draw the line. This is the dumbest I've ever felt in this podcast, by the way. The most ill-equipped.
So are you going to tell the sex worker that comes to you and says, look, this is my job. I chose my job. It gets worse for you.
I know.
I chose my job.
I
chose my job in an economic and legal situation where I know what power the state has.
Okay.
Yeah, and I chose to work on the street knowing that this happened.
You're right. Agency. They had agency in that. You're right.
So,
do you want to talk to my friend Maggie McNeil sometime?
Totally.
Have you talked to sex workers directly?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what do they say? Have you done this with them? Have you taken...
I haven't had this particular conversation, but I recently asked a sex worker who was, at an event that was held at the law school, and famous activist. And she was coming and she was talking about her role as an activist for over something like 30 years in Canada for sex workers' rights, and her role in a seminal Supreme Court decision, Bedford, at the Supreme Court of Canada a few years ago, which actually struck down most of the provisions criminalizing aspects of sex work in Canada for violating our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, in large part because the court sided with the sex workers in saying that the laws and the criminalization of all these aspects around sex work actually made it unconstitutionally unsafe, impermissibly unsafe for these women in their jobs. Right?
Amazing.
It's great, fantastic. Yeah. And I asked her, what do you?
Except they didn't follow up on it, right?
Right. So
it's still it's still de facto illegal, right, in Canada?
So sex work, okay. So in Canada, sex work itself has never been so the actual exchange of sex for money is not illegal, but all the things around it are. So you can be prosecuted for soliciting, for living off the avails of it.
So it may as well be illegal.
So it's essentially illegal. Yeah. So what happened was the Conservative government at the time instituted a set of they did change the law, but it made it worse. The short story is that Trudeau has promised to change the law. He has not yet done so. There's basically a consultation going on and a lot of political wrangling over what you'll be very familiar with about the approach that Canada should take to sex work, whether we should legalize in the sort of so-called Swedish model, which I think is completely ridiculous. The model that criminalizes the John alone, that's crazy. So it's unresolved, and you should keep an eye on it. But it's because it's a really fascinating and contested political space in Canadian politics right now. But I asked this woman about a month ago, what do we make, or how should we, what do you make as an activist in this realm about the MeToo movement, and the fact that it's claiming women's liberation and everything. And it's true that sex workers experience often sexual violence. That can happen. Based on the laws we have it. And they do. And we just talked about that. I asked her, what do you think about being aligned with them or not? And there are two parts to this. I think part of the sex worker critique of Me Too that I've read most about have been the allegation by sex workers that they've sort of been excluded from the discourse of the movement and part of that makes sense because they don't constitute the perfect victim, right? Mm-hmm. But what this sex worker said to me is that I don't really want to have anything to do with them. I don't see this project as enhancing my agency in any way. Mm-hmm. And that for me was a different sort of critique that I thought was telling and useful.
Yeah, no, Maggie. The sex workers I know hate the Me Too movement, but one of the reasons they hate it, I've heard, is that we were really raped. You weren't really raped.
Yes, I'm doing right, but this woman said the opposite, and I'm on her side.
All right, we got to get you and Maggie together, and we'll finish this. You'll have it out, and I'll just watch. I just want to see because I don't know where I am on this.
It's tough.
I'm really passionate for both sides on this, and I'm telling you, this is.
You need to become more of a socialist and recognize that we can have a great state-based sex work system. And I don't mean testing and all that stuff. That's not what I'm talking about.
So one of the things,
give them unions and money and make it good for them to do their work.
They used to have money before it was made illegal. You just have to make it legal, and they will have money.
So that's a different debate, which we can have, but I don't think is actually true. Yeah,
fine. So we'll do that in the next time. So I have two things left for you. Okay. One is that last night, 24 hours ago. Oh. It's exactly 24 hours ago. We had dinner.
Oh, I see. I was gonna be what did I miss?
Yeah. And at that dinner, I said to you, I'm going to give you. Sure. I said I'm going to give you 24 hours to think about this because you didn't have an. No, you didn't have an answer.
No. I
said I'll give you 24 hours to think about it, and now your time is up, Heidi. The question is, people may not have actually gotten this feeling from this interview because you've been in a great way, very intellectual and professorial in a very good way, but you're really, really pissed off about Me Too and the politics of it, right? And I asked you at dinner, why are you so pissed off? And you said, You weren't sure. I don't think you didn't. You were thinking about it.
There are many reasons, but I agree with you.
So now you've had your time. Now answer. This is the unregistered question. This is what we do here.
Yeah.
Why are you so pissed off?
Yeah, I mean, I think it encourages us. I've said this in passing a few times, I think, during the interview, but I haven't made as much of a meal of it. And which is to say, one of my huge concerns here is that, again, as a scholar of law, despite the fact that I have so many problems with how we think about law, I'm not prepared to just not have the important discussion about why law is important and how law can help us organize social goods in ways that are meaningful. What I'm really worried about, though, here does have to do with law and policy and the real risk. And actually, it's materialized in several different arenas. The real risk that this MeToo movement is leading down, is encouraging us to go down a very dangerous, very conservative, very sexually conservative, very regressive, very puritanical, and this is not the standard critique where people just say, oh, well, you're a Puritan. I do think that's true, but it's deeper than any of us have imagined because it goes beyond the question of sexual abuse or sexual harassment, and it encourages us as a society to have really, from my perspective, horrible attitudes about how we organize not even just sex, but basic human intimacy. Because the policy encroachment that MeToo is having right now, and it's just started, and I said this from the beginning, like I was saying this in the beginning of November, and people were freaking out then, and I'm sure they still will now, but the ridiculous level of reactionary, paranoid, really conservative policy that's only begun to come out of this is and it's going to get worse. It's going to fuck up social relations and intimate social relations, which I value, I think, above anything else in life.
There it is. Oh, you value intimate social relations, do you? I see.
So
how is it going to fuck them up?
Well, I mean, like, I can't even have. I'm not just a joke about it, but it's true. I went to the massage therapist the other day, and he says to me, Horatio, my massage therapist, said, seriously, that's me. He's great. He's fantastic.
Of course. He's named Horatio. Yeah.
Right? Like you would be. And he's so good. And he gave me, he said, well, I'm sorry, I need you to sign something first. So the Ontario Association of Registered Massage Therapists. So based on provincial legislation, require them to adopt a series of policies that would reduce the risk of sexual abuse or violence in the registered massage therapy context. Mm-hmm. Like, these people already have professional obligations. We didn't need to create professional obligations for them not to do something to you on the table that they shouldn't do, right? Like, we didn't need this. And to my mind, I didn't know there was any, unless somebody can tell me that there was some kind of problem about registered massage therapists raping people. I mean, where is this coming from? It's coming from this Me Too inspired wave, which didn't, as we went and talked about, didn't just start with Me Too. It goes way back through all these other policy things. We didn't even get to campus politics, but it goes back to there as well. It's a whole other issue. And so I had to sit there and read the form and the level. I mean, I had to initial whether he would massage anything considered a sensitive area. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was kind of just now the response to that is the typical Me Too, pro Me Too response, to say, well, what is it to you if all you have to, in your quality of life, if all you have to do is initial a piece of paper?
Right. He's the one who's being constrained.
Yeah. You're being protected.
You're getting a massage.
And you're being protected.
And your vagina is being protected.
Yeah.
From Horatio's hands.
Not just that. Anything around my butt or any of my pecs are protected. If you're a woman, you have to, there's a separate area because your breasts
Heidi,
are sexual.
What are you saying about yourself?
Losing? So what am I losing in this scenario? And I was just laughing. Horatio and I were laughing together, and I actually explained, you're not going to believe this. I actually work on this stuff. And then we had this whole discussion. But the suspicion, I mean, that's just one silly example. It is a silly example. There are some very serious examples, including... No,
it's not actually that silly.
I don't think it's silly. So this is what I'm saying. I don't think it's silly. Yeah. And I think this...
But there are even worse possible examples. Many. So that's what I want to hear. What are you afraid of happening in intimate relations?
I think that it destroys the I mean, most people are so fucked up that they can't have intimate relations anyway. Proper, you know what I mean?
True.
We don't need to fucking help them.
Right. Well, we do have them. We just have a lot of problems in them. Yes.
So intimacy is a problem in like our cultural context to start with.
Okay.
And that's not just about sex, but obviously has a lot to do with sex. And this is going to make it worse because it's going to cause people to be. So also, you're not going to like this, but the level of individualism associated with MeToo claims, like I have been harmed, I am a victim, I am another individuated participant in this discourse, is also disturbing to me. Why? Because it's all about self and ego.
But it's not individualistic; it's collectivist.
I don't know. That's a separate. I don't think it. I think it's a radically individual. I do.
What? Huh? No.
Now they're individuals getting together.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
But they want to be special.
I'm sorry, Professor Matthews. You are actually wrong about only one thing, but it's one thing you're very wrong about. It's a collectivist movement because they're making claims on behalf of all women, are they not?
So I'm not sure that disrupts the fact that I feel that there's a neoliberal feminist.
Hello, what's the name of the damn movement? Me Too. Yeah, right? Me too.
We.
I know, but come on. That's
anyway, whatever. I don't need to make a meal out of this right now. You're distracting me from my intimacy point. Which
is way better anyway. Keep going with intimacy. Yeah.
You know, whatever. But anyway, so it fucks up our ability to be here's what's funny, to be vulnerable, actually vulnerable, because we're focusing on a paranoia and a specter. We're focusing on a social specter of vulnerability around basically all social relations that have some kind of sexual element, that we're encouraged to build walls. We're encouraged not to be open with one another. We're encouraged not to take risks. This is hugely important for me. Risks are just disincentivized massively. Taking risks with other people physically and emotionally.
Why is that important to you?
Taking risks because, firstly, I don't think you can have good sex unless you're willing to.
So apparently.
Secondly, but it's not just about sex. I don't think you can have good social relationships. I don't think you can. And so I value intimacy. I mean, if I have to make a case for that, but I think that's one of the more valuable, and I think it's a political goal.
You value intimacy, and it sounds like you might also value good sex.
Oh, no, absolutely. And they go together, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
and what I mean by that is not, and so the typical response to that is to say, look, consent is sexy. You've heard people say this, right? Yeah. Isn't consent sexy? Don't you think you'd have better sex?
My former colleague coined that phrase. Her name's Lisa Wade. She teaches at Occidental College. I'm not kidding you.
Oh my God, gross.
Yeah. Keep going, Heidi.
Barf emoji.
We're getting somewhere here. Very important. Keep going.
Barf emoji. Yeah. I don't know that. I think that's
people just got a little taste of the true Heidi Matthews personality, by the way.
Perfect.
Keep going.
I just think it's I'm actually convinced that, you know, and I think it's a political good. It's a political value. I think it's a public good. I think the capacity to have really meaningful, intimate relationships that are premised on a level of sharing and vulnerability relies on a level on the ability to take a series of risks. And I love the category of risk here. The idea of engaging in situations where you don't necessarily know from the outset what you're going to want in the situation. I mean, the MeToo is asking, and its approach to consent is asking us to just say, well, women should only do what they want. And I don't think we, women or men for that matter, any of us, know necessarily what we want before we have an intimate encounter.
That's another really dangerous thing you say in that in one of your articles. Yeah,
I do. I'm committed to that.
Sex, the thing is constantly being created. Whatever it is that's happening is constantly in flux. It's a totally postmodernist idea, right? In other words, that, you know, from second to second, from moment to moment, the sex act is changing. It's becoming different things, and you don't know what it will be in the next moment, right? Right. It's all contingent. It's all.
No, I don't think contingent means that, like, it's kind of, I mean, it is contingent in the sense that it's not a priori given.
Fixed. Yeah, it's not fixed.
It's not a priori given, but you do have, like, control over it to an extent. You can exert your influence, and it's an interplay of subjectivity.
Stop talking. So here's the thing. Here's the big question for you. Okay. So I'm pretty sure there are a lot of other women out there who also value intimacy, and a lot of women who value good sex. Okay. Why is it that you're pretty much the only one making this argument?
Because I'm crazy.
Somebody's really wrong here. It's either you or all other women.
No, I mean, I have to say, like, I think women are, I think people, and again, this is a very bad outcome of the movement. Being unorthodox in this space means you get tarred and feathered. So people aren't willing or committed enough to take that risk. Maybe I just value intimacy so much that I don't know. I don't care. But
so that's one possible answer. Is that you simply value sex and intimacy more than most women do.
That I'm willing to take the risk of being tarred and feathered.
But
Than more than most people. So obviously I'm willing to take
Why do you value risk more than other women?
Oh, risk.
Because I think you do. Is that right? I think that's what's going on here. I think a lot of
people, look, I'm not telling people they have false consciences. That would be ridiculous and it would be a perverse.
Thank you, because I would throw you out of here if you did.
No, of course not. That would be a perverse.
That's a fireable offense.
Yeah, of course.
Here. Okay.
So I'm not going to tell women, like,
I know you don't.
People can do whatever they want in the bedroom. I don't care. People can have, if people want to have all the affirmative consent with their married partner of 50 years, they can do that and be happy.
Why are you so different than almost all other women, at least in this country and in Canada? Why? That's what I'm getting at.
I don't think I am. I think I'm just willing to say what a lot of people, my colleagues, are thinking.
Oh.
I don't think
I'm
the silent majority. Yeah.
You're going to be known as the Nixon of feminism.
No. Yeah. So, I mean, I just know that, in my circles, and it's not just women, it's men. So let's not devoice the men.
And I think we're all rapists.
Men are allowed to have their own reservations.
Especially the German men. They're rapists. No. All right. I think there's a lot more there. We'll unpack that in Heidi Matthews, the sequel. But so here's the last thing. It occurs to me that Renegade University needs a law school. Don't you think? It just seems like
everyone needs a law school.
Don't you think?
Absolutely.
Like a good one too. Like
no, not a third tier one that's going to charge.
Oh hell no! Oh fuck no! We're going to be the best law school. And the other thing is we practice. You'll love this part. We practice affirmative action. So we value
women.
Yeah. How did you know I was going there?
Because I'm not going to make the joke.
Here's the other thing. Law schools, you have to have a dean, right, of a law school. And guess what? We have a job opening. Okay. Thanks for being here. You're amazing.
Thank you so much. It was a huge pleasure.
This was phenomenal. I really have never been, I've never really felt at a loss on a big question like that before in any interview.
Well, I did my job then.
Yeah, thank you. That's all I have to say to that. And I do hope you become the dean of the Renegade University School of Law. Okay.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
This was the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To support the show and become a member of the Unregistered community, go to unregisteredlisteners.com. To purchase any of the Renegade University video courses or to sign up for the weekend in New Orleans with me, go to thaddeusrussell.com/courses.